Mr. Thompson, if you'd like to come on up. Okay, committee, let's go back to work. We were in the middle of a good discussion on peace officer training in Wyoming. Good presentation from Director Walsh and Director Bain, the Colonel of the Wyoming Highway Patrol, and we ran out of time before lunch to complete a little bit of discussion and offer the opportunity, Mr. Thompson, for you, the sheriffs and chiefs, to weigh in on how we train our people. So good afternoon. Thanks for your patience, and we look forward to any comments you have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alan Thompson, the Executive Director of WASCOP, the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police. Really greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak to the committee. I'll be as brief as possible. We'd like to apologize for a lack of written comments prior to the deadline on May 30th because it was kind of a tight timeline, and I think we're realizing there's not a central database for a lot of this information, and then trying to gather that's been a challenge. But that list of questions, there were some of them that really stood out to us in wanting to make sure that we let the committee know. One of those was, if you look at the President Past Academy budget that you can find on page 60, well, the President Past budget of the Academy from the last 10 years, you can see that it's almost $160,000 lower right now than it was 10 years ago. And that might look like a great cost-saving measure on the state level, but costs have gone up for everything, and that increase has to be borne somewhere, and where it's being transferred to is to your local agencies. If you look at page 65 in the handout that was provided by Director Bain in the Academy, 20 years ago, it cost a local sheriff's office or police department $0 to send someone to the Academy, other than getting them in a car down there and paying them a wage. Now, if someone shoots a .40 caliber, which is a pretty common round, and a .223, all costs associated in 2024 with sending one person to Peace Officer Basic is about $1,821. And you have some of the attrition and loss of personnel and shortages that we're struggling with right now. You could see a medium agency of 20 officers need to hire as many as 4 or 5 in 1 year and put them through the academy. And now you're looking at $10,000 for a year and a half out from your budget process, trying to budget for that huge amount. So those cost savings on the state level are definitely being passed on to the agencies. And as the cost of things like meals and ammunition goes up, then so does the bill to the local agencies. Along those lines, we talked a little bit about the guest instructors having the opportunity to teach down at the academy and bring their skill that they're, have built up over decades on the street in the communities that they serve, and how beneficial that would be to the basic students, having somebody that's working, a shift yesterday and can come in and give real up-to-date information on a homicide investigation or a sexual assault investigation or whatever it may be. The pay for law enforcement professionals to come to the academy and guest instruct, of which I've been doing for almost 20 years, is currently $26 an hour. That's a lower wage than most agencies pay a starting deputy prior to going to the academy. And also they pay 50% of the federal mileage rate. So if somebody's driving their personal vehicle from Cody, Wyoming to the academy to teach a 4-hour block, they might have a love for that, that teaching and sharing of their knowledge and experience with that next generation, but it's untenable. And I can only imagine the struggles the academy has trying to fill those guest instructor positions. I won't go into much detail, but the attrition and retirement question came up quite a bit on what we're doing across the state to fill those gaps. I reached out to the Wyoming retirement system, and just last week received a pretty extensive response from them that we're still filtering through. I'll share that response with each of you after the fact today. Sorry we didn't get it to the deadline beforehand, but the data from Wyoming retirement system indicates the average turnover rate is about 12.4% over the past 10 years, with 2014 and 2024 being just over that 14%, but in the middle, it had gone down. So 3 years ago in 2020, that turnover rate was 10.9%, and it's steadily climbed the last 3 years. So I think if we look over the last 50 years, it's cyclical, depending on the economy and a number of factors. But specifically in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of change in law enforcement and community perspectives of law enforcement nationwide. And if this trend bears true over the next 10 years, then we could be in some pretty serious trouble there. One thing that we haven't talked about today when we're talking about education, there was a question that was put to us about marked vehicles. And I did want to mention specifically the reference to slick top vehicles, which is a term we often see with a law enforcement vehicle that does not have a light bar mounted on top of it. I think there's a misnomer that a slick top vehicle is not an unmarked vehicle. Markings on a vehicle include agency and sheriff and police and all these things that can be on the windshield, the tailgate, the back trunk, the side, all that kind of stuff. But a light bar on top is old technology. You're going to see more and more light bars being taken off the top of vehicles, and for a couple of reasons, for the longevity and efficacy of the equipment. So if you we found this out personally with trucks, pickup trucks, the light bar on the top is not visible in lots of situations. But if you put lights inside the top of the windshield, at the bottom of the windshield, by the hood, and in the grill, now you have 3 levels of lights that are higher visibility for the people that you want to see you, and it comes down to a safety aspect. And then light bars on top of vehicles are more subject to the weather, getting packed with snow and being invisible to begin with. So I just wanted to mention that there is a difference there with slick tops and unmarked vehicles.
Question.
So, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Just on that topic, so the slick top, I understand the ghost markings, I think they call them now, where they're real faint kinds of markings and so forth. I think the question was about the trade-off between protecting the people of Wyoming from imposters who might pull over somebody out on a dark and lonely highway with a light versus the effectiveness of a law enforcement vehicle that's got minimal markings on it so that you can see people texting on their phones when they're driving by you and all those sorts of things. So as a training issue, where the statutes say the vehicle has to be plainly marked, how minimally can a vehicle be marked and still be considered plainly marked for traffic enforcement?
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, great question. I would have to defer that to the attorneys that are providing the opinion to the agencies. There's different interpretations of what plainly marked means in different areas. And, I think most of our local law enforcement are in the business of marking their vehicles plainly, so there's that deterrent effect. But also, statistically, the people acting as law enforcement and pulling people over, I think I had 2 instances of that happening in Sheridan County in my 25-year career. We talk about it a lot, but it occurs very little across the state. And when there is concern about that, you'll see people calling 911 and say, I'm being pulled over, and driving to a police department or a well-lit parking lot or things like. There's different ways we've addressed that on the local level, I think, in many communities across the state, alleviating that concern and allowing individuals to do what makes them feel more comfortable, yet still affecting that traffic stop eventually.
Any other questions for the sheriffs and chiefs? Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple quick things. When you're talking about case law updates, many of our local agencies have relationships with their county attorney, city attorney, town attorney, and provide those case law updates internally. We actually brought the Attorney General's office to the WASCOP conference to talk about the big Supreme Court decision that you have on the agenda this afternoon, because we felt that was important enough. So we do, and we also had an update on the legislative session to explain the laws that affect law enforcement that will go into effect, have gone into effect, or will go into effect July 1. So WASCOP is committed to helping that communication and that education and getting people that know the answers to those questions in front of our group so that they can learn from it and make decisions on their own for their agencies.
Appreciate it, Mr. Thompson. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the topics that came up or discussions in the training realm was that local agencies will bring in folks to train their local law enforcement people. And I'm wondering if you can speak to kind of how that decision-making process is made. What are your folks talking about in terms of what trainings they want to bring in and what their priorities are in terms of that?
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, from my experience, the individual agency need with the current makeup of, say, the Gillette Police Department and the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office being what they are, they have different skill sets in each of those agencies. So your administrators are looking for what training is needed to bring our agency up to the expected level of our community. And oftentimes sending 25 people to the academy for homicide investigation school is not something that's feasible across Wyoming, because if we held that in 25 communities across the state, we still wouldn't get 25 seats or seats filled in that. So then it becomes more affordable and easier to plan for when you're going into Nebraska, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, based on where you're at in the state. Oftentimes it's a closer drive. Places like Billings, Montana, and Salt Lake City can bring in high profile training programs that I think we would all agree that law enforcement is law enforcement is law enforcement across the state. The applicability of individual state statutes might be different, but the concepts seem to all be the same. What we see a lot in Wyoming with our smaller agencies is the train and the trainer concept. So we will send somebody from an agency to a training with the expectation that they come back and train everyone in their organization and maybe the whole county or a 3-county area. But the fact that the academy is in the middle of the state and the timing of the academy's availability to have trainings in addition to their basic trainings, because it's a very complicated calendar, usually does not work well for the local agencies.
Go ahead, Representative. Follow up.
And I guess a follow-up to that would be, what role does overtime costs end up playing potentially as well? I mean, I assume there's a burden to local agencies when they have to make decisions about, we'd like to get these guys trained in X, Y, Z, but we don't have overtime pay that we can give people to fill those slots while they're at a training maybe out of.
Mr. Thompson, comments on that?
So that all comes down to a balancing act of the administrator. Many of our agencies work on that, the FLSA rules of over 183 hours or 173 hours in a 4-week pay period, which then can mitigate some of the overtime, but you're still paying an hourly rate over and above a 40-hour week, basically. So those are all considerations into planning that training and being able to, oftentimes you can send one to the training and not negatively affect the schedule, and then bring them back and then as convenient, provide that training on the local level. That seems to be the most feasible option.
Okay, further questions of Mr. Thompson? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So I think it's either post rule or statute, you get 40 hours every 2 years of continuing education requirements. In your estimation, is that adequate? Does the average peace officer need more than that amount of training just to stay minimally proficient today?
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question, because I based that off my experience in an agency where we more than doubled that each year. We tracked it by year, so we would need 20 a year. More than doubled that, and in some cases, much more than that. It depends on the needs of the agency and the individual officers within that agency. As the post director pointed out this morning, the first few years, of certification until you hit that professional peace officer certification. Sometimes it's more like that 80-hour need in a 2-year. So yes, that first few years, there is a greater need in some cases for official law enforcement training hours. But then after that, it's based on the needs of the agency and the experiences that you have. Oftentimes you can learn a lot through experience. You know, when you're working with your training officers or your mentor officers in your organization and walking newer officers or 3-year officers through a case they hadn't worked before, there's constant learning going on all the time. Making it official through post-documented hours, I don't know is necessarily as important as continuing to develop good officers throughout an entire 20, 25, 30-year career. So, Mr. Chairman, I had one more thing that was brought up in a question this morning, was that concept that a peace officer could be on the street back home for up to a year before going to a basic academy. I'm not sure, the quick conversations that we had over lunch would indicate that peace officers being in that situation are relatively low in number. But detention officers, that is a big difference and a big deal for our sheriffs across the state. Because of the shortages that we experience in employment, detention and dispatch seem to be more affected by that than peace officers, even though peace officers are, we can say that we're shorthanded in that area. But the big difference in a detention officer is they're working in close proximity with other people of experience. So by belaying their trip to the academy to that 10, 11-month mark, I don't think negatively impacts their ability to do the job, because someone is right there or right around the corner to help them, to supervise them, and then that basic academy is a continuation of their knowledge. So while I think that's a good discussion on where we're at with peace officers in the state, it would be very difficult for our sheriffs to send detention officers to the academy short of that 12-month mark.
Further questions? Mr. Thompson, thank you.
Thank you for your
Appreciate
time,
that.
Mr. Chairman and committee.
Would anyone else like to come forward on the peace officer training piece this afternoon on our agenda? Any public comment? Or is there anybody online? Okay, I'm gonna close public comment. Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts on that topic before we leave it? Appreciated all the information we received this afternoon.
Obviously, this is a really big topic, Mr. Co-Chairman, and I would just ask that the committee take it back up again in September. I don't necessarily have a bill draft in mind at this juncture, but I think we want to bring these folks back together and delve into this a little more in September, be my ask of the committee.
Representative, do you have something?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a motion. I just wanted to kind of second the co-chairman's thoughts. And I would also add, you know, Post as an agency has, I think, 3 full-time staff people, including a director two, even fewer. And I've had conversations with my local chief and some other members of law enforcement that say, you know, potentially there's more help that we could provide Post, which would then help our local agencies. And I think we need to have a more robust conversation about what's the value that we have of Post, and are we willing to put more resources towards that? Because I think it's incredibly important. I brought legislation last session to kind of try and figure out how can we have a different monetary system to ensure that we're paying Post to do the job that we've mandated them to do. And I think that maybe that's part of that discussion that we need to have, is this bigger picture of, you know, cool, we've got all this training and we ask them so much of Post, but have we spread them so thin that we're also hurting our local agencies?
Thank you, Representative. Any further thoughts? I have a couple. One, I agree, Mr. Co-Chairman. I'd like to take up anything additional that on this topic. I'm looking at the Deputy Attorney General. There's several deputies, I realized the minute I threw that out there. I sense that the Joint Judiciary Committee is probably willing to help advocate on a couple of spots here. But we would love to hear from the Attorney General, maybe in September, and maybe we can reach out and encourage that. We want to follow a lead, but we also want to push the envelope a little bit. You heard from the representative, and we heard good comments from Post and others about training people up. And I have to confess, committee, I was one of those Appropriations Committee members who affected one of the cuts that was referenced this morning. Back in the mid-teens, we were faced and literally cut $350 million out of the budget that year because we had to. And that's never caught back up again. Well, we're sure willing to have that conversation, and if we'll see about reaching out and making sure in September we're ready to take this back up. How about that? I don't think we need a vote for that, committee. We will just plan on doing that. So let's move on this afternoon. Fingerprints and background checks, the youth services folks, please come forward. And Kara, you guys, let's start with you. S'more, thank you very much for being here. I had no order in mind, so that was perfect. Ms. Chambers, please introduce yourselves, and we're anxious to hear from you.
Mr. Chairman, co-chairman, members of the committee, my name is Allison Moore. I'm one of the deputy directors of the Division of Criminal Investigation.
Good afternoon, Kara Chambers, Director of Division of Victim Services within the Attorney General's Office, and I am merely Deputy Director Moore's backup.
All right, take it away.
Okay, I'd first like to give you guys a brief background on the process of background checks. When we talk about background checks, we call them applicant background checks. The people that we're doing these background checks on are for various reasons: licensing, permitting, and employment purposes. Most common, you'll see the people in the healthcare field, child care workers, real estate, gaming commission, the list goes on. In order to qualify to have a national background check done, first there has to be a Wyoming statute in place, and then we submit that statute to the FBI for review and approval under Public Law 92-544 to have background checks done. The process to have that approval put into place is a lengthy one, and it's pretty cumbersome. Right now, we're still waiting on answers back from the FBI on bills that we submitted in January, March, and December of 2023. Once the FBI approves a statute that we can run background checks, then we're able to start processing those background checks. Every organization that does background checks handles it a little bit differently, in addition to how they collect those fingerprints. Some agencies collect fingerprints themselves. Many of the school districts do that. However, a lot of agencies do not collect fingerprints themselves, and instead they send those applicants out to have those fingerprints done elsewhere. Most often that's done at your local sheriff's department. There is one county that the sheriff's office does not do fingerprinting, and instead those folks go to a medical facility and pay for fingerprinting there. There's also a difference in the method of collecting fingerprints. They can be collected through a machine called a live scan device, which is electronic, and those are the highest quality fingerprints that you can collect. And then the other method, which is what school districts and most of them use, are ink and paper. And that's the old school rolling the fingerprint. Live scan devices, we purchase many of those with grant funding. The DCI does that, and we send them out to the local sheriff's offices. Most often though, those fingerprinting devices are located in their booking area in their jail facility. So those aren't always accessible to people who are having applicant fingerprints done. So even in some of the sheriff's offices, they're using ink and paper. A live scan device runs $20,000 to $25,000 a piece. That's just to purchase the live scan. That does not include the annual maintenance that you pay to the vendor. Live scan devices are also used for arrest fingerprinting. And when we receive arrest fingerprint cards, those come digitally to DCI. We have to have a direct connection between the sheriff's office and DCI for us to receive those digital fingerprints. And because of security reasons and the system that we have in place at DCI, there's a special piece of equipment that we have to house at each sheriff's office in order to have that direct connection with the live scan. And because of that, we have to limit where those are. So we can't put live scans in, say, school districts to have them direct connect to DCI, at least not at this time. Once an individual is fingerprinted, we also do fingerprinting at DCI. We do fingerprinting 1 day a week at DCI. I know that many of the sheriff's offices also limit the days and times that they fingerprint the public. I don't know of anyone that has anyone that their sole job is to do fingerprinting. So that's the reason. At DCI, we have 3 fingerprint examiners who process all applicant cards and all arrest cards. And those 3 fingerprint examiners then take turns fingerprinting the public 1 day a week. Once the fingerprinting is done, that's again where the process depends on the agency that the person is being fingerprinted with. Some agencies, such as DFS, has the individual return the fingerprint card to DFS, and then DFS compiles all of the cards, and they send them to us on a daily basis. Other agencies have the individual submit the fingerprint card to us. When they submit fingerprint cards, most individuals are attaching a money order or a cashier's check. We do have to charge for those background checks. We're charged by the FBI on a monthly basis. Some state agencies, such as DFS, we send them billing to help speed that process up a little bit. Once the fingerprint card arrives at DCI, then I have 2 people in what's called our applicant tracking section. One person enters the biographical information off of that fingerprint card into our tracking system. They process the payment. They also do a cursory look at the fingerprint card to make sure that it's filled out correctly, that the fingerprints look good. Then those cards go over to our 3 fingerprint examiners where they're scanned in one at a time. And then they process those cards. They send them to the FBI, the digital fingerprints, to determine if there is a criminal history or not. They return those results to those 2 people in our applicant tracking section, who then compile a letter that says if there is a criminal history or there isn't. And then again, we have 2 ways that those results are getting out. We have one system that is an online portal that agencies such as DFS have access to. They log in and it shows the results of everyone that they had submitted cards on. And then some people do not have access to the portal, and in those cases, we mail those results out to them. So there's a lot of things that go into fingerprinting. At any point in that process, we may have to reject cards if it's low quality fingerprints, if we determine that, or if the FBI determines that the fingerprints are too low of a quality to make a match. Also, if there's any issues with the monetary amount, if they submit the wrong amount of money, or if they don't fill out the fingerprint card correctly. At any point, if the cards are rejected, then it restarts that entire process over. We understand this takes quite a while. This entire process from start to finish is a lengthy one. There are a few problems in place, one of which was staffing. We recognize we only have 2 people in ATS. We requested additional positions during this past session. We were granted 2 positions. Thank you guys for that. We have posted those, so we hope to do interviews soon and get 2 people started, hopefully as soon after the next biennium starts as possible. So we expect that will help with our turnaround time. We're also in the process of purchasing what's called a batch scanner. The scanners that we use for the fingerprint cards are a special kind of scanner. It's not something we can go to Office Depot and purchase. But this batch scanner we can process several cards at one time, scan them in. So that should also save time. There are several other issues in place. We have a lot of requirements when it comes to the security of the system. We fall under the FBI's what's called CJIS, or Criminal Justice Information Systems Security Policy, because of the systems that this accesses. And so that's one of the, I guess, hurdles that we have, is trying to get more access for, say, that online portal. Right now, we're only doing that for the most part for state agencies because of the security with it. So we work closely with ETS on trying to figure out ways that we can improve services. I recently sent a member of ETS down to Oklahoma to meet with the FBI to go over the CJIS security policy, so that the IT people who actually understand that part of it can determine, is there something else we can do? The other thing that we've looked at is we've looked at other states and their turnaround times. There are some states that have similar turnaround times as us. Currently, our turnaround time is about 15 business days from start to finish. Some take less time, some take more, kind of depends. It also depends on what's going on. It's summertime, the horse racing industry has picked up. We do a lot of fingerprint cards for them. We will get a banker's box full of fingerprint cards. So that kind of slows it down for everyone. So those are things that we're trying to figure out ways that we can improve. So some states have similar turnaround times to us. Other states, it's a matter of minutes or hours that they turn results around. I've reached out to several of those states to find out, how do you do that? How are you getting these results back so quickly? A lot of states run 24/7, their background check section, 365 days a year, they're fully manned. That's not something that we have. We run 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. They also have, Oregon is one that, because we also looked at agencies that use the same system as us. Wyoming doesn't have an in-house criminal repository when it comes to fingerprint cards like some states do. Colorado does. They have their own system. They pay millions and millions of dollars a year to maintain that system. Wyoming instead, many years ago, we entered into an agreement with Western states, and it's the system called WIN. And so our in-state records, we maintain with many other Western states. So they use similar systems to us. Those are the states that I'm most interested in their turnaround times. Oregon's one of them that they sped up their turnaround time drastically. But one of the ways that they did that is that they contracted with local fingerprint collection agency, and it's actually one agency that they have a contract with. And then that agency set offices up throughout the state of Oregon, so that within 1 hour of every resident of Oregon, there's a facility that people can go in and be fingerprinted. That works for Oregon. They have a much higher volume of fingerprint cards than what we do in Wyoming. We process around 33,000 cards a year. Especially in our more rural communities, we have a lot less. I don't know the feasibility of trying to find a vendor that would open an office up to do a small number of fingerprinting appointments there. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. I do believe that we'll increase our turnaround time once we have these 2 individuals started, but there'll always be somewhat of a lag until we're able to improve some of the systems. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Committee, questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, it seems to me that some of the delay that we hear about all the time could be happening before the cards are ever mailed to you. Are you familiar with, other places where we have log jams or delays that, and are you tracking the day you receive the prints till the day that the return letter is sent, so that we can tell clearly whether the delay is occurring within DCI or whether the delay occurred externally?
Ms. Moore, go ahead.
Yes, co-chairman, yes. We track from the moment that we receive the card until the results go out. So I'm not sure on the front end or the back end how those results happen. Every agency or organization that's doing the fingerprinting has that different process. Some organizations will collect fingerprints and then they wait until they have a stack of them to send them in to us. So some of the older fingerprint cards they've had sitting there for a while. Others send them to us on a daily basis. Like I mentioned, DFS. DFS does a lot of fingerprints for a lot of different reasons. To my knowledge, they're sending them to us on a daily basis. We receive cards every day from them through the interoffice mail in the state system.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think part of the problem is, a few years ago, I tried to get an increase in the fee because, when you'd have to take an officer, off the beat, some of these smaller agencies, and if it doesn't go well and they have to redo it or whatever else, and we charge such a minimal fee in Wyoming for that. If you think about how much it costs per hour for an officer, we really lose money. Maybe I'll try and bring it back, and maybe that'll speed it up. But I think that's what happens in some of these smaller agencies is they've got to bring somebody in to do that. And it takes time. I mean, we actually charge more for a VIN, which takes less time than we do for fingerprinting. So you kind of, maybe spurred me into maybe trying to see if we can do that. And maybe that'll help some of our agencies get the results to you guys quicker. I don't know for sure, but just a comment.
So Deputy Moore, did we get pretty good response from the FBI? I mean, what in the overall turnaround that you're talking about, which is very bureaucratic, what that sounded like was pretty bureaucratic. When you send that off to the FBI, how fast does that turn around?
Chairman, you're referring to the actual background results. How long does that take to turn
Yes.
around? Some of them are what we call lights out, where it's instant. So really what it is, we're not waiting on another person on the other end to look at the fingerprints. More times than not, the fingerprints that we're running, that person has no criminal history. And so those return fairly quickly. It's a system, a database that it's comparing, digitally comparing these fingerprints to these fingerprints. So that happens very quickly. Sometimes there needs to be a little bit more interaction with a fingerprint examiner, whether it's on the FBI's end or on our end. But again, that's a very minimal amount of time. I really think the delay has to do with the time getting it to DCI, one. And if the agency is not in Cheyenne, they're mailing those cards. So also, it depends on how long it's taking to get through the mail to actually get to us. And then that time getting it processed with us, and then again, getting those results mailed out. It's just a lengthy process. I would also like to point out, there are online background check companies, and some agencies will use those where they say, well, I already ran a background and I got results, in minutes or instantly with an online background check. The thing to keep in mind is that those organizations, that's a name-based search. It's not a fingerprint-based search. Also, I'm not sure where those records come from. I'm not familiar with those private organizations. I know that some courts, their records are out there for everyone. They're open states. Wyoming is a closed record state. So DCI is the criminal history repository. We do not release any of those records to those organizations that do the online name-based check. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you aware if we have any redundancies that cause complications? Like, for example, if you want to be a substitute teacher in 3 different school districts, do you have to be fingerprinted in each of those school districts? If you work in a daycare in Hot Springs County 2 days a week and then a daycare center in Washakie County 2 days a week, do you have to be fingerprinted in both counties? Those sorts of things. issues like that that perhaps the legislature might be able to address.
Deputy Moore, go ahead.
Chairman, co-chair. There are some redundancies. We do run the same backgrounds on the same individuals repeatedly, and that's for a few different reasons. When we do a national background check, we can only do it for one purpose, and it can't be released for another purpose. So an example of that would be if the Professional Teaching Standards Board has someone fingerprinted, they can't share those results with the school district where the person is going to go work. So there's the potential that someone's getting fingerprinted twice for one job. And that has to do with FBI requirements on, you can't release those results of that background check to someone else because you're running it for a different reason. There are also some of the statutes out there that require individuals to get re-background checked. Now, someone may get hired, or they may be given a license or a permit in a certain area, and then they get rechecked a year later or 3 years later. Some may say that's redundant, but you're also going to catch any criminal activity or criminal history convictions that occurs during that time frame.
Okay, anything else, committee? Really appreciate it. Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the committee on this bullet point, fingerprints and background checks? Good afternoon. Welcome to you both. You know the drill. We like for you to officially introduce yourself for the record. That particular microphone, that one, we ask you pull it close because it's not quite as powerful as the other one, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nicole Hauser. I'm the Executive Director for Cathedral Home for Children in Laramie. I'm here with the Wyoming Youth Service Association to speak on this topic, but really going to let my colleague Clark do all the talking, and I'll chime in if needed.
Thank you for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Good
Mr.
to see you
Chairman,
again.
members of the committee. It's good to be before you this afternoon. And we appreciate you looking into this topic. The Wyoming Youth Service Association had requested this as an interim topic, and I must say that even as of today, we've learned a lot about the process.
So Clark, let me, just for the record, let's make sure that folks have your last name. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Clark Fairbanks. I'm the Director for Wyoming Youth Service Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. We know you, of course, and just wanted to make sure that we got you on board. So go ahead, please continue.
Yeah, and I'll start with the Wyoming Youth Service Association is made up of 17 member agencies across Wyoming, all nonprofit youth service agencies. And I share that with you so you understand our perspective in this topic. I will, in the interest of brevity, not go through DCI's process because Ms. Moore provided that in detail. I did provide a handout to you from our understanding of that process that included that. And so as we look at this, what we're asking is we've identified the challenges as well as some possible solutions for your consideration. And I think this understanding really helps. For us, the problem is fingerprints and the DCI background checks or FBI background checks take on average from our experience 4 to 6 weeks. And I think that's consistent with the testimony because we have, in addition to the DCI timeframe, we have the Department of Family Services time and mail time. And that's if the print is clear and, as it was stated, doesn't start over. Our challenge in that as member agencies is by the time we do the background check, we have advertised the position, interviewed, conducted references, done child abuse registry checks, and then made a conditional offer. So we ask for consideration, that takes considerable time before we get to the point of having to do the 4 to 6 weeks additional for a DCI background check, and the challenges that creates for member agencies who are running 24-hour, 7-day-a-week programs when maybe that employee did not give a notice and we have to fill that position. That requires most member agencies who are small to be backfilling that for that entire period of time, paying overtime. So just kind of talking that through in that process, I just touched on a couple things that I want to kind of cover for understanding. And this is on the second page of the handout, as really I look at our process. So it was discussed, when we get to that point where we've made a conditional offer to the employee, most member agencies, I believe all of them, send their employee to the local police department or sheriff's department to do the fingerprinting. Many of those agencies are only open certain days and certain hours, and they bill member agencies, or the potential employee has to pay it, and in most cases gets reimbursed. Just explaining that. Many of those law enforcement agencies are able to do digital fingerprinting, but then they have to be printed onto the fingerprint card because they cannot enter it into the system or send them digitally. Therein lies part of the problem is, and some smaller agencies, law enforcement agencies still do the old ink and roll. And so two things can happen. It can print unclearly, or it can be smudged a little bit. They're pretty adept at doing that, but when those get kicked back, it starts the process over again. So in addition to the law enforcement fee that Senator Schuler was talking about, there's also the fee then that gets paid to the Attorney General's office, the $39 for processing that. And that's just informational. And so the fingerprints are done by local law enforcement. They're brought back to the agency. The agency then mails them, often expedited mail, to get them as quickly as we can to the Department of Family Services, who is our oversight. Department of Family Services then reviews the waiver, the check, and the fingerprints. So they have their process. That has improved in timeliness. They reported to me just today that on average, their front-end time frame is 2 days. So if you take a couple days of mail, a couple days at DFS, if someone's out on vacation or that it's not a weekend or holiday, then it gets transferred to DCI. Then and I won't go through the DCI process, then DCI gets their report in that 4 to 6 weeks. They send it back to Department of Family Services. Then it takes, on average for Department of Family Services on the back end, 3 days to respond back. If it's clear, we get notice or mailed back to us notifying that. If there's a flag, we don't get that information, but the employee gets notified they can go to DFS to pick that up. Not to us as an agency, so we're still waiting. Then that employee can go to DFS, which in some cases isn't in the same community that the youth service agencies are. They get that information from DFS, and then they can bring it to us as the agency. In some of those cases, then those employees just disappear or resign and say, no, thank you. But again, in that process, I think from an agency standpoint, we've invested in giving them a contingent offer of employment. If you can imagine a professional position, if I offered you a position today and said, but I can't really give you this position, and you're going to have to wait 2 to 3 months to start. Most people aren't in that situation. They can do it. So as agencies, we're often asking for a waiver from DFS to allow them to train, put them on salary, but they cannot have any direct contact with clients until we get that back. This is not for WISA pointing a finger at any agency or department, but a request to say, is there a better way? Is there a way through awareness of this, we can streamline this in some ways?
So Mr. Fairbanks, real quickly,
you.
just to interject a question, why on the backside, the 3 days at DFS? I guess I was not aware, and I've actually sent these off and waited just like you have. Why does one of your entities not get the results of that background check? That has to come from the person who is being checked? Am I understanding that correctly? So how do you find out that it was red flagged?
Mr. Chairman, this is from my understanding of that process. I think different agents, state agencies also are submitting to DCI because we're licensed and certified, different than, as an example, the school district. I'm not sure school districts go through Department of Family Services, but we as a license certified by Department of Family Services, all of ours has to flow through Department of Family Services. And so that process goes through them first, and that is one of our recommendations to look at. Is there a way that those could go directly and even better electronically to DCI? Is there a way to streamline that? I think one of the stumbling blocks, and this is on our recommendation number 2 on that, is we have to write a physical check to the Attorney General's office for that $39 that DFS then also checks off. It goes to DCI. And so there is that payment component that has to follow through. If that could be done electronically or by credit card maybe, or by billing, if that would allow us to submit them directly or electronically. I'm talking about digital prints. If there's a way to email those and email back responses directly. I don't know the legal and logistics, but that's part of what we're asking to explore.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, so on the back end too of the results that we received from the Department of Family Services, so DCI has done the check, they've sent the results to DFS. What we receive as the provider is an email, to clarify, Clark, is an email notification, and it says either meets eligibility to continue with employment or does not. So that's the only information we know. So when we get the meets, we're like, yahoo, let's go. The does not is when we have no understanding of why they did not. And that starts the process of the employee going through an appeal of meeting with Department of Family Services to get the results. So that 3 days from DCI to DFS, I imagine they're referencing our substitute care rules that we fall under to determine if that background meets those requirements. But then upon that, after that review, we receive an email notification for clarification.
So, Ms. Hauser, in your experience, do most of the employees at that potential prospective employees, do most of them give up at that point and just go somewhere else?
Mr. Chairman, when they receive the does not meet the eligibility or the waiting?
When they receive the not meet?
So I recently actually have a current applicant that is going to appeal that. They don't understand what would have come up in the background. We don't know either. We do use the online background check service, even at the front end, trying to mitigate having, because we pay the employees while we wait for this. So we want to ensure that they're going to pass before we invest in them while we wait on this process. So we've already done some of that vetting at the front end. And so when it does come back, does not meet, we're also a little confused as well. I will say there have been employees that have gone through that appeal process and it's been successful. Clerical error, we've had, during COVID, there were some really interesting systems in the court. And we have had employees where it does not meet, we tell them about the review process and they do disappear. And so then we mark them as job abandonment, which at that point, it seems pretty clear that they also think it's probably settled, so.
So I hate to even suggest this, but is the bar too high in most of the positions that we're hiring? I get that we want perfection dealing with our youth. We don't want to in any way put anybody in jeopardy. In your review, Mr. Fairbanks, did you give any thought to that? Are there places where the bar is just too high and we're going through a process that's probably not necessary on that position?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that question. I think from the member agencies, we want to do the DCI background check to ensure children are safe. That said, one of the options we proposed was the potential to do the independent party background check and to allow that until the DCI background check comes back and verifies that would be helpful. That could pose some risk, but it would be minimal, and that's just one of the things, and that might be a department consideration, it might be a rules, or could be federal law that's driving some of that. But to look at that is really one of the things we are asking for consideration and examination.
Thank you for that. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know a lot about most of these agencies and how they function and so forth, but would there be any value in allowing the new hire to work in partnership, but they couldn't work independently with clients? Would that help at all, or does that just mean you got two people doing the job of one?
Ms. Hauser, maybe you could tackle that one.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, so technically by the rules, which is a federal law that has been passed down to the Department of Family Services to oversee, they can't even be on site without that DCI fingerprint check done. However, we have worked with Department of Family Services to request a variance. So we've established a process, some more bureaucratic process, to be honest, where we show that they've passed abuse neglect. That's a pretty instantaneous check that we're able to do through DFS. We show that we've started the fingerprint process. And then for Cathedral Home, we do our own, we use an online system to check the databases that do allow checks. So we submit that, we ask DFS, can they please start training alongside a staff who's gone through all the background process? But we have, 40 hours of training that they need to go through before they're even able to be with the children or families. And so DFS will grant that based off of what we submit so that we can honestly get them having built some context, and then fingers crossed, right? The DCI comes back clear and then they're ready to go in that sense. So we have found a workaround, in all honesty. But that is for a larger agency that has capacity and resources. I don't want to speak to our smaller agencies where, it's 10 staff on, and their ability to pay a person the same salary and they really can't count towards staffing ratio, really are just there to be trained, so.
Thank you both. Anything further, Mr. Fairbanks? Ms. Hauser? Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Yeah. I want to go to anyone else who would like to testify on this particular item. Anyone else? Any public testimony? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, we do have Rachel Campbell online from DFS.
Okay, Rachel Campbell?
Yes, sir.
Miss Campbell, well, we're going to let her in, and she's certainly welcome. So welcome, Miss Campbell. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Co-Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Rachel Campbell, and I'm a policy supervisor within the Department of Family Services. And I supervise our background check unit, which is the staff and processes involved in these DCI background checks that you've been discussing today. The department doesn't have a planned presentation for you today. However, I noticed there were a couple questions that came up during a bit of conversation that I can maybe provide some more information to you regarding. The first one is the question about redundancy. Do we look at redundancy and what can we do to help these entities not have to file so many fingerprint background screens? And we do take that into account within the department. Unfortunately, the area where we're able to reduce redundancy is only for our child care licensed providers. But what we are able to do with those is, as long as we have previously run a criminal background screen through fingerprinting for a child care licensed entity or their employees, if they're submitting a screen for a different child care provider that's also licensed within the agency, and the screen is within 6 months of when we've given a prior eligibility decision from a fingerprint, we can actually use that prior fingerprint. So we have a 6-month window there when, as long as it's between different licensed childcare entities. So we do look at that within our agency. Mr. Chairman, I believe you asked as well about why we have a 3-day processing lag time at the end of our process once we retrieve criminal history background from DCI prior to returning back to the facilities. What we did in order to get that number is we isolated our substitute care providers that we have run fingerprint background screens on within the past about 6 months. So from January 1st, 2024 through June 7th of 2024. And we have 325 screens that met that date requirement specifically for subcare providers. And that's the WISA providers. The majority of those fit within that subcare category. Out of those 325 screens that we've run, that's not an incredibly large number to get an average. And so there are some outliers, whether that be there was an error in the screen that we had to return back to the provider unprocessed. They decided to leave their employment. We were notified by the facility that they didn't need the result after all and didn't want to go through the hassle of getting it. There's a lot of different reasons why we may not have returned that. The other reason being, sometimes we receive criminal history information from DCI that's incomplete. As you've heard, especially during COVID, there was some strange court information kind of floating through those criminal background check information. And what that requires on our end is for our staff, we have one full-time staff who works on these. It requires some more investigation. So contact with the court directly, contact with a local law enforcement entity, something we can do to verify that record or find additional information, especially if the criminal record we're seeing could be disqualifying that person from employment within a subcare facility. So when we take into account those outliers out of the 325 substitute care background screens that we have sent through DCI, when we remove those timelines that don't fit kind of within that standard, we're actually right at 2 days on that back end. And that's from retrieving the information from the DCI system and then having them reviewed by hand manually by the staff within our office to determine whether or not that criminal report meets eligibility to work or disqualifies them from eligibility. So that's kind of where we get those variants. This data reporting is new to us. And so as we move along, we're actually hopeful that as we get more data, we get a better, clear picture on what these timelines look like, especially with those outliers. And now that we're able to isolate those outliers, which is something very new to us, that will give us some direction on what we can do to help address those specifically and get those returned to our providers in a quicker timeline. The other question I would like to address, Mr. Chairman, is the question of whether the bar for our licensed providers through DFS and needing those background checks, if that bar is set too high. Our authority and our requirement for criminal history background checks comes from the federal 4E requirement. That's a very stringent requirement, and it impacts a lot of programs within the Department of Family Services. Within 4E, there's a description of child caring entities. Our substitute care licensed providers with Wyoming fit into that definition of child caring entities, and therefore, pursuant to federal law, they have to go through this background check. There's two places that it specifically states that these have to be a full national fingerprinting background check. One of them is within that Title 4E, and then also within Wyoming statute. It also does specifically in 719-201A(1). We do have a specific requirement that employees of a substitute care provider certified by DFS pursuant to our juvenile statutes under Title 14, that they also shall be required to submit that fingerprinting in order to obtain a national criminal history record information. Now, one reason why this is really important, you've heard a suggestion today about using an outside screener to get preliminary information. But as DCI explained, those are name-based searches. What we find compared to name-based searches is that there's a lot of additional information that comes across to us in that criminal information in the FBI check. It pulls from different states and it pulls federally. And we're able to get a complete picture of the people as to whether or not they have disqualifying offenses or background dedicated to them. And so we follow that federal law in order to be in compliant with 4E, which I say impacts a lot of internal programs within the department. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, as the department, we really do appreciate our partnership with DCI. They're always in great communication with us. And so anything that they feel they can do or suggestions they have to us as well on ways that we can work with them, we're happy to engage in that as well. Over the past few years, we've really worked well and want to make sure that DCI as well as us are in compliance with all of our federal laws, requirements, and reporting. And with that, Mr. Chairman and committee, I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have of DFS.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. That was a lot. Thank you. So I do have a question real quickly for you, and that is if you could wave your wand and help our youth services folks, along with some other folks, what would you ask of this committee that we might do to expedite?
You know, if I could wave my magic wand, I would honestly say I would defer to DCI if they have suggestions of what can help them internally. I think as far as internally within the Department of Family Services, we just underwent an audit as part of DCI with the FBI regarding our practices and our policies and how we handle these background checks, and we're given some wonderful guidance. I think we're on a good path and now able to isolate small areas internally where we maybe could make some small improvements here and there. I'm not an expert at what that looks like through DCI, however, but I understand, you know, they've always been willing with us to help streamline, give us suggestions on our practices. And so I really would defer to DCI as to what they may need to kind of help our processes back and forth be more streamlined.
Okay, thank you. Anything, committee? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is there any indication that this backlog timeframe is more problematic in some locales around the state than it is in others? Might there be some opportunity to improve circumstances in particular counties, for example, that perhaps we could put in different technology in a few locations around Wyoming and have some substantial difference? Is it localized or is it pretty well spread out?
Mr. Co-Chairman, you know, I really don't know that information. Where we began kind of tracking to the point where we can extract data and break down numbers for you or locations is when we receive that fingerprint card, the cover letter, the waiver, and that payment within the mail directly to our office. You know, so we've heard some anecdotal things, just as you heard from DCI and WISA, you know, in some places it's a lot harder to actually get a fingerprint done. But we don't have any recorded information where we could actually quantify and compare different localities. You know, that may be something we could look into or see if there is other information from our local field offices. You know, we do have contacts across the state that some agencies may not have due to our local field offices. You know, I'm happy to go and see if we may have some data or even some stories or some suggestions for you prior to the next meeting. But I wouldn't be able to give you an actual idea of what those localities are encountering at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I would give you a little homework assignment. I would like to hear back from any who have addressed this particular bullet item on our agenda today. I'd like to hear back. So by about September, anything that you can suggest to us, I would hope that maybe you could be willing to do that a little later in the year. That would give you time to really give it some thought. If it's technology, I'd like to know what that is. If it's something that we can do between you and our good folks at DCI, we would be happy to lean into that blocking sled and try to move it down the field a little bit. And I'm gonna ask the same of DCI. You know, what can we do? If we look in the mirror, maybe we can comb our hair a little bit differently and get some results. Okay. Anything else on this particular topic, folks? Anybody else online? Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Thank you all for addressing this problem. I'd like to hear back from everybody in September with maybe a suggestion of how we can do this thing better, help our folks out across. So crime reporting update, Ms. Chambers and Ms. Moore, welcome back.
Yes. Kara Chambers, Division of Victim Services. If I could just make one comment. Remember, we'll have those 2 positions as of July and try to get them trained. I don't think September will be quite enough time to see full results. They'll probably still be in training, but
I think that'll give you an
Yeah,
opportunity for some
absolutely.
observation and
Absolutely.
share that back with us. We just, we're compelled by what Mr. Fairbanks and Ms. Hauser brought to us, and there's others out across. And so thank you for the attention you're going to give to that. Take it away on the reporting piece.
Absolutely, thank you. For those of you who have been around a minute, you might recall that this was a fairly robust interim discussion. 21? Thank you. I had to think. In 2021. And at that time, DCI presented some data and statistics similar to what we have provided for you today. With that being said, this was a topic that was suggested by Management Council, I believe by Senator Nettercott, who had been chairing the committee for the Senate at the time. So we are here to provide a brief update on where that stands and perhaps entertain some more questions since we've had some distance from that back then. But we might have some suggestions after on process.
Wonderful. We're all about suggestions. Take it away.
All right. I forgot to mention earlier, so I would like to add Director Jones had planned on being here today, but he had another commitment that he couldn't get rescheduled. So
Okay, when you get back, please tell him hello from all of us.
I will.
Okay.
You should have all received a copy of the list of law enforcement agencies in Wyoming and who is reporting and who is still in a pending status. Currently, 61 agencies, or 73% of the agencies we have listed, are reporting, and 23 agencies, or 27%, are not. Since the last update that I gave to you on February 9th, 2023, we've added 10 law enforcement agencies to the NIBRS reporting data. That includes Wyoming Highway Patrol, who had never reported crime statistics before. 3 of the agencies listed are in a covered by status. When we talk about covered by status, what that means is typically it's their local sheriff's office is reporting their crime statistics for them. Most often that's because they're sharing a record management system or an RMS with that sheriff's office. Many of these agencies submit their crime statistics using that record management system. And so if a smaller agency uses that with them, they go ahead and submit on their behalf typically. So those are what the little asterisks mean. Of the agencies that are not reporting, we're hearing a lot of the same things that we've kind of consistently heard. It has to do with issues with their vendors, with those RMS vendors. They're still struggling with NIBRs. That is nationwide. This is not a problem unique to Wyoming. This is something law enforcement across the country struggles with. Additionally, staffing issues tend to be an issue. A lot of our smaller agencies will have one person who's handling NIBRs in addition to many other things that they're doing. Very few agencies have anyone that their focus is reporting crime statistics or even in records data. This year alone, in 2024, we've conducted 3 NIBRs trainings so far. 2 of them were at DCI, one was in Casper. We also have 2 trainings coming up this summer. We have one scheduled in Afton and one scheduled in Rock Springs. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So these agencies that are not currently reporting in NIBRs, are they still able to submit at the state level? I know they can't to the federal level, but can they still submit to the state level, the old standardized UCR reports? So we know how many murders there are in Wyoming. We know how many robberies there are. That
Deputy Moore.
Chairman, co-chairman, no, they are not. Prior to NIBR's data, we collected data through summary reporting. We no longer collect summary data. There is a system in place that they can manually enter the information instead of using their record management system. That works very well for our very small agencies who don't have a lot of NIBR's reportable offenses. And that's pretty cumbersome for our larger agencies to use, but it is something that agencies can do as they can individually enter each of those cases.
So Deputy Moore, is there anyone on this list pending that perhaps has no desire to come on board? Or are you optimistic that we can turn this list purple?
Chairman, I'm optimistic. No one has told me that they don't want to participate at all. I mean, I think we had that a few years ago where there were some agencies that were pretty clear that we're not going to report. I haven't had that. When I've called many of these agencies myself and either talked to a sheriff, a chief, or the local records person who's putting the information into the system. And I think there's a desire there to comply. They're all aware that they're statutorily required to submit their crime statistics to DCI. I think it's just figuring out a way to overcome some of the struggles that they're having.
Okay, thank you. Anything, committee? Anything else? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the 2021 report in terms of going through and what folks are saying their status was in 2021. And there's a lot of folks that are saying, oh, we're testing. I'm trying to find a specific example. I think maybe Fremont County. But we're 3 years later and we're still testing. Can you elaborate on, I mean, maybe specifics about the vendor that is our problem? I want to believe it's not our agencies dragging their feet.
Deputy Moore.
Chairman, Representative Provenza. I can't speak specifically to Fremont County. I'm not sure what struggles they're seeing. What we see when they say they're testing is that they've started entering their crime statistics into a test system that we use. And then we work closely with that agency. As they submit data, we run reports. If there are errors, we work with them to complete those errors, to correct them. And then we certify them so they can start submitting crime statistics. What a lot of them have ran into with testing is staff turnover. They have to go to training before they can start submitting data. If they only have one person who submits the data, they enter the test phase, and then that person resigns. Now they have to refill that position and again, send that person to training to be able to submit data.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we know if there's any common link in terms of a particular vendor between these green listed agencies? Is there one vendor company that's common to many of those?
Deputy?
Chairman, co-chairman, I did leave that off of this list this time around. At one point, we had listed out who their vendors were. And at that time, they were kind of all over the place. There's several major vendors of RMS systems, and I think each one has their own struggles. The other part to that is when an agency pays for an RMS system, it's not like they're going to the store and they're buying a pair of shoes and here's my shoes and it fits all, right? Each agency is paying for different pieces to that system. And so some of it may be that one agency has a different version and they have different features turned on for their record management system than maybe another agency. So that becomes one of the struggles as well.
Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you maybe remind us what the consequences are for this? Because I know we talked about this at length in 2021, but I think half the committee is new, maybe most of the Senate's new. And so the conversation was, if we don't have an X amount reporting NIBARs by the 2021 deadline, that we were losing federal funds that we divvied out to our agencies. So and that was why I think the severity and why the former chairwoman of this committee brought it back up in Management Council. So I'm trying to wrap my head around, what consequences are we facing because we're not reporting to the fullest extent? And then if agencies are having this issue, what do we need to provide to potentially the AG's office to then get the work done on our local agency level so that we don't have to have this exact same conversation again in 2027?
Ms. Chambers, do you want that one?
Sure. Chairman, Representative Provenza. Yes, so one of the things that we discussed back then, and it still is the case today, is the actual Wyoming statute itself has no penalty. There's no real repercussions. I think another way to say it is it doesn't have any teeth. But on our end, if what you're referring to is we talked about a potential 10% reduction in our federal grants. Now, I think with 73% reporting, I'm pulling my notes as well. Oh, yes. She was pointing me to the statute. The statute is 71102 that I'm referring to. But I don't believe we've seen a reduction. I hope the 73% meets that threshold on the national level. But I still think it's frustrating. I can speak as someone who is routinely trying to look at data to compare it to the number of victims I have versus the number of, arrests versus charge versus convictions. And it's hard to compare. It means nothing if I can say, well, this county worked with X amount of domestic violence victims, or we had this X amount of sexual assault victims, and I can't really correlate that to the Crime in Wyoming report because not all agencies are reporting, and so it's frustrating, which is why this matters. And I think Representative Provenza, you bring up a very good point. But so the suggestion I think that we were talking about is, if there's no real penalty to the agencies,
Ms.
I
Chambers,
guess I would hope the incentive is to do the right thing and to better the cause, but it is.
Just a couple of things. First of all, do some checking, find out if we've had some reductions in grant funding. That would be of interest, I think, to the committee. But the second piece of that is there's leverage points that can be brought to bear on some of this. That, there's a big number that are just encompassed in a couple of counties, for example.
Yeah.
And they can be encouraged to get on board with this. So, maybe bring that back to us, any suggestions you might have.
Chairman, and I'd also like to reiterate, what Deputy Director Moore has said is, it's very agency specific. And so perhaps what we can do when we come back in September is have those really minute discussions of what is going on with Afton PD? What is going on with Basin PD? What is going on with Fremont County Sheriff's Office? Because I mean, you'll see majority of the ones that are pending are the smaller agencies. And I would venture to guess that their issue is, time and money, i.e. people, having the capacity to do that. And so that's a different discussion of incentivizing versus some of these larger agencies that not really sure,
Thank
but
you.
yes, but that's
Thank
what
you
we
for
could
that. I
provide.
think that would be very helpful to the committee. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What concerns me is that I suspect that the police chiefs and sheriffs are eager to be on board, but they're not getting support from the elected town councils, city councils, county commissions, and that if there were more of a consequence for that locality, there might be more desire or at least interest in getting some of this done more expeditiously. But as long as there's no consequence, and the police chief walks into city council and says, hey, we need to do this, and they go, well, what happens if we don't? Well, nothing really. Well, then it's not going to be a real high priority, I wouldn't think, for that elected body. So it's something we need to probably talk about in September.
Okay. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did have this discussion in 2021, and the discussion about teeth, and I know myself, and at the time, I don't want to speak for her, but Representative Rodriguez-Williams, the reality is that you're talking about there is a punishment to our law enforcement for not basically prioritizing this instead of other things. When I can tell you what happens in Fremont County, they said it was taking about 45 minutes to put one of these things in. And then probably by the next day, we have 10 new crimes. It's difficult, but if you think that at least this representative is going to support somehow adding a punishment to our law enforcement, I will not support that.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this might be getting into maybe committee discussion, but I think some of the concern that going back to this big picture of not funding our counties and municipalities enough to be able to prioritize the things they need, but I also think we could incentivize and potentially still not get the outcomes we need because of capacity issues. So I think it's a bigger discussion, Mr. Chairman, but and going back to the consequence issue, I can't remember exactly if we talked about what that could look like. I know it's more complicated than, because you can't withhold training because that hurts due process for the individual officers that work there. You don't want to withhold more funding because they need to also do their jobs. So in terms of where we add teeth, I don't know exactly what that looks like. But I also know got a lot of statutes with no teeth in them and a lot of people that don't abide by them.
Well, and I would remind the two representatives that it doesn't necessarily have to be a stick. It can be some kind of a carrot as well. But I do think it would be beneficial to the committee to find out what the holdup is and what specifically does it take for us to help some of these entities get on board, because it would help us as a state in so many other ways. And so I don't want to just throw up my hands and say, well, we just couldn't get everybody on board because some of them didn't want to make the commitment. That's not good enough in my opinion. So I think that's good, committee, for now. We'll bring this back in September with some additional information perhaps, and thank you very much, both of you. Does anybody else want to testify on the crime reporting piece? Any testimony on crime reporting this afternoon? Anybody online? Okay, we will close public testimony and go to our next consideration. Homelessness and squatting and perhaps some other issues. The chief of police from right here is with us. Good afternoon, Chief. Thank you for your patience as we work through tough stuff.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, committee members, thank you for working with us today. It's important to me to acknowledge that present in the audience today is Councilman Kyle Gamroth with the Casper City Council. He's here also to demonstrate to the City of Casper's resolve and support for dealing with some of these issues that are plaguing our community, our state, and our nation. Societal norms have been changing somewhat more rapidly than we're able to adapt to them. The increase in frequency and occurrence of homelessness is far outpacing our availability for shelters and across the nation, not just in this community. The homeless population, especially in Wyoming, tends to be a little bit migratory. So if you were to look at the people that I'm dealing with today in my community, some of them reside, they're long-term people we know on a first-name basis. But unfortunately, there's a vast number of them that we've never seen them before. They just showed up in their migratory travels. What they're bringing with this is what is with them is what is happening across the nation. I would submit to you that without making light of a dire situation, which homelessness is, that there's a good significant portion of the homeless population that has the unique ability to sniff out a vacant, abandoned, or absentee owner property, or a property that's in probate or foreclosure processes. They can smell it from miles away, and once they find them, they invade those properties. So if I can paint for you a picture, imagine my parents, if they were alive, but they would be in a position in life where they would be retired and they would be at a point in life when they probably would want to consider living in Arizona during the winter and returning here for the summer. But when they returned home for their summer after spending the winter away, when they went to go in their house, it was now occupied by 30 people that they did not know. Those people are living in there, using their clothing, their furniture, their beds, they're eating the food that was in there. They've been living for quite some time. When my parents would say, "What the heck, you're in my house," they would produce a fraudulently obtained lease, claiming that we rented it for $100 a month from somebody. Here's our lease. And so my parents would now be stuck with the unenviable position of trying to engage the lawful due process steps of being returned to their property. That involves notifying the sheriff and beginning an eviction process. At any point along the way, these illegal, unlawful occupiers can protest along the way and just drag this thing out, and they can survive in there for months and months and months, not paying for the utilities, trashing the place, while my parents are forced to live in a hotel and get legal representation. This is occurring more and more. It has happened here in Casper. We have our vacant businesses, our homes where there's an absentee owner. It's amazing how many of these homes that are in probate because the owner died without an estate. And so when my officers are dispatched to this thing where crime is occurring in abundance, the sexual assaults, the drugs, fires, all kinds of things horribly are occurring, we're very limited. They say, "Hey, I had permission from the deceased owner to be here." I now lack the ability to confirm or dispel that rumor. And so people are able to take advantage of these situations to cause our property owners great distress, to diminish property values, to diminish neighborhoods, to diminish communities. And so I stand here before you, first of all, recognizing that the city of Casper has gone to great lengths to shore up our own ordinances. For example, we've made it a requirement, if you're going to be on private property, that you have to have the ability to immediately provide proof of your lawful presence there. And we can do that to the extent that we can at a local level, but we're not able to take care of some of these other needs. What I'm asking the committee to consider is the reality of this problem that is happening nationwide, but is now migrating to us. Other jurisdictions have been dealing with it for a couple of years,
It's just taken a little while for those chickens to come home to roost here in Wyoming. What I'm asking for is for us to consider an expedited due process by which we can restore the lawful owners to the property to the possession of their property. Instead of letting this thing drag out through eviction processes and long extended court battles that are never intended to be won, they're just delaying, it's a delaying tactic. As long as they can, then they move on to their next victim. When it finally gets down to it, they don't appear at the court date. The house has now been abandoned, but it now has tens of thousands of dollars of damage to it. I would ask that we consider criminal sanctions and civil sanctions against knowing persons who are squatting in other people's property. So I want to be sensitive to the needs of our homeless population, but the ones that are criminally inclined, I would want us to consider a criminal sanction for this criminal conspiracy to occupy somebody else's property under pretense. And that because of the damages that are being incurred, because of the legal expenses being foisted off on the lawful owners of it, and the unfairness of having them have to rent motel rooms and eat at restaurants, that there ought to be civil penalties as a portion of this legal action that I'm asking us to consider. And I would recommend strongly to you that we enact very similar to when our Fish and Game is dealing with trespassing issues, when hunters are on property that they should not be on, we require those hunters to be able to produce proof on the spot that they have lawful permission to be there. And I would strongly recommend that this committee consider bringing changes to the applicable statutes that are already in existence, trespassing and things of that nature, that would require the same thing of these persons that are occupying a structure of private property, that there is a requirement for somebody to produce valid proof, verifiable proof, that they have the authority and the permission to be there and not are in a squatting situation. I've tried to be sensitive to the time constraints the committee is having. I boomed through that, but I would now stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, I do appreciate you being here, and I recognize the significance of this problem. It's growing, and I know that Senator Anderson is working on a bill draft for the 2025 session. But I'm just asking, it sounds like when we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars of damage to a house, that we've already got statutes for destruction of property, and we have a conspiracy statute and so forth. Why can't the existing statutes be applied to some of these circumstances?
Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. That's an excellent question. It boils down to our ability, according to the statutes that are available to us, and the discretion that we provide to our prosecutors. This is a nebulous area of proving that somebody claims that they had the opportunity to be in there. I leased this place. Look, the lease says that I could use the property and that it was a furnished kind of, so you can obtain these fraudulent leases easy. We get lost in the court ramifications of trying to prove what their intent was. I would submit to you that a person who paid $500 to rent what would arguably go for $5,000 a month rent is kind of aware that they're gaming the system. And so what I would tell you is that when it comes to destruction of property, we need to prove intent to do that versus the just general negligence of somebody being in that property, knowing that it's not their property, knowing they're not going to have to pay for the damages nor care for the clothing and the furniture, the mattresses, the bedding, the carpets, that they just don't care. But we would have to prove that they intended to damage that versus just their lack of. What it boils down to is taking advantage of the situation, knowingly taking advantage of the situation, taking advantage of it as long as they can, and then moving on to the next one.
So, Chief, I did want to thank you for recognizing the efforts already been made by the council here, and Councilman Gamroth, thank you for being here. Appreciate your work. It feels like maybe you've done about all you can do at the local level. Am I reading that correctly? Is there anything more we can do locally?
Mr. Chair, it's important to me to notice the economic impact that this has had on the city of Casper, on these vacant, abandoned properties, absentee owners that just don't give a crap anymore. We're still stuck holding the bag. So what has happened is, at a greatly accelerated rate, the city of Casper has been forced into, out of matters of just pure public safety. We cannot have these be the havens of crime that they've become. And so we've entered into the condemnation process on multiple structures in our community. We would much rather that those were housing for people that need housing, but they've become so destroyed through this process that we have no choice but to condemn them and to engage in the demolition process at our expense. That expense is far outpacing the value of, even if we put a lien on the lot, the expenses of bringing in that crew and disposing of all of that stuff far exceeds our ability to put a lien on that property. So we have, to our own detriment, we have tried to do everything within our power to minimize the hazards that are happening from the public safety impact this has had, and to protect our homeowners, our property owners, and our business owners. We've done pretty much everything we can, even at great expense to us. But it's not just about Casper. I want to reiterate, this is happening across our state. We've done some things. It's not enough. We still deal with it on a law enforcement level. Some of it has been very flagrant and in our face, where in some cases, millions of dollars of damages has occurred because of these processes. We're just asking for consideration on the part of this committee and perhaps the LSO to see what can be done on a statewide level to shore this up, to restore our property owners' rights to them so that they are not stuck in a months-long court battle to get back into the home that we all know belongs to them.
Thank you, Chief. Anything, committee, any questions? Let's go to Representative Jennings and then back to Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, thanks for being here. Just a quick question here. So if you catch someone out there, fish and game, criminal trespass, how many of these people, well, first of all, how many incidents are we talking about that's happened in Casper in the last year? And two, criminal trespass, if somebody's trespassing criminally, you don't let them drag that out for months and months and they continue to do damage. How many criminal trespass arrests have you made?
Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I didn't come prepared today to tell you the statistics on it, but I can tell you my officers are making trespassing arrests, if not daily, multiple times weekly. The difference between the trespassing while I'm hunting is that there is an owner that we can get a hold of. We can sink our teeth into that. We can ask that owner, Fish and Game, who's got them on speed dial. Did you give permission for Bobby Jones to be on your property? No, I did not. Okay, here's your ticket. But the difference is if it's in probate, if it's in a foreclosure, if the owner is deceased or the owner is out of state and we've lost track of them, we can't get a hold of them, I am stuck proving that they are in fact trespassing. I am at a default position of I cannot prove that for simple trespassing. So I'm asking us to kind of shore that up, to put an affirmative action on their part to be able to provide us with proof or immediate contact information for the person that is the lawful person that can give them permission.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, can you give us an idea what the source of these people are? Are they from other areas of the state, or are they from other areas of the nation? Or are they part of our border issue? Can you address that just for a minute?
Mr. Chair. Senator Cooper, I would tell you that we are experiencing people from just about every state, but we are not seeing an influx of persons that are improperly in our community. We're not dealing with that. We are dealing with an entrenched, kind of mobile population who has kind of figured out how to game the system. and are going jurisdiction to jurisdiction, committing these crimes, what I believe to be a crime, with a little bit of impunity, but it's not a reflective of people that are arriving in this community and are, for lack of a better term, undocumented.
Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chief, would you say this is more or less a professional ring of people that do this? I mean, this is just their lifestyle? They just go from one to the next? Is that what's happening?
Chief?
Mr. Chair, Senator Cooper, I would tell you that there absolutely are people that are organized and this is what they do. That absolutely exists. There's also another group of kind of that quasi-criminal element that have just discovered this is a loophole that they can take advantage of. There are ones that are organized and they're good at it. And you see that in the news footage across our nation. You'll see those, people will pull out their phone and record those interactions with somebody unlawfully in their home. And those are the ones that, they're very much organized and it is a criminal conspiracy. The other group is just kind of that criminally inclined element, their priorities are more associated with substance abuse and other things. They use this as an opportunity.
Anything else, committee? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions. First of all, what is the process for the evictions? I mean, how long does it take and how does that work? And then I have a follow-up question.
Mr. Chair, Madam Senator, I would tell you that the processes of eviction are well codified in our statutes. That is generally handled by the sheriff, who is authorized to empower his or her deputies to go out and do that eviction process. It under most cases, requires a 30-day written notice. So they go post on the door and 30 days goes by while again, under my example, my parents are now living in a hotel, eating out at restaurants, trying to figure out how to navigate a system they never knew they were going to have to get into. Did I answer your question?
Yes, just to follow up with those, sir.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then if you're talking about maybe trying to come up with some solutions to expedite either civil or criminal types of sanctions against these squatters, would it be better coming from the local entities where you could just go through an ordinance situation, or would you rather kind of see us do something at the state level to kind of make this more consistent?
Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chair, Madam Senator, often, every time that I come before this committee, it is not representing solely the members of my community. I see these things as challenges that are affecting our state. I see these things that are impacting our longevity, our economic well-being, and I see these as opportunities to improve the quality of life and cost of living for every man, woman, and child in the state of Wyoming. And I would submit to you that, yes, we could try to address these at a local level, and we will have mixed results on that, and it will be mixed delays, when in fact, I believe that this is in the best interest of us to address on a statewide level on behalf of our citizens, on behalf of our quality of life, on behalf of our cost of living.
Chief, thank you. If you want to hang tough, you're welcome to stay put. We may have a question or two come your way here in a minute. On this particular issue, I know that our district attorney's office, we have representation here. Would love to hear from them if they so choose. Please consider coming forward. Mr. DA, thank you. It's good to see you. We would, I'll let you introduce yourself for the record, please, and we would appreciate any thoughts you have on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, co-chairman, and committee members. My name's Dan Itson. I'm the district attorney here in Natrona County. I've been with the district attorney's office about 24 years now. Over those 24 years, I've seen a lot of changes. The chief's talking about changes that perhaps we didn't see back in 2000 when I started. All these things are interrelated. Several of the topics that this committee talks about. Yesterday, I attended the veteran court presentation. That definitely ties into other things, specifically my office. And when we talk about new laws and new crimes, my office has not seen an increase in personnel in 20 years. But we pass new laws as they come regularly due. In that 20-year period, we have seen changes within our court systems. I've spoke with the chief and other heads of law enforcement in Natrona County just last week. We now in the court system are required to produce discovery within 30 days of a district court arraignment. That includes test results from the crime lab. You can imagine we can't get our test results from the crime lab in 30 days. Frankly, the court asked or said we could object to that and we'd have a hearing and see what happened. What the chief is talking about and what we deal with are very serious crimes to happen to the most innocent of our citizens. And to simply roll the dice and see if a judge is going to allow your test results in because they're outside that 30-day window is ridiculous, but I don't know what else you do. Along with that, there's a provision in the rules of evidence, we call it 404B, basically prior bad acts. A prosecutor can file a document saying an individual has these prior bad acts that we'd like to introduce in a jury trial. That is due within 30 days as well. So in Natrona County, in very short order, we have been placed on what can only be described as a rocket docket. From time of arrest, when the chief's officers make that arrest, you have a preliminary hearing within 10 days. And after a preliminary hearing, you have your district court arraignment. That can be as quick as 2 weeks. And then we're in trial from time of arrest, probably 75 days, 90 days. The office itself, I have 7 legal assistants. We handle right now 111 felonies. You simply can't keep up those numbers and produce that work that quickly, even though both agencies work extremely well together and closely. I think that is an issue. It'll be an issue for our victims. Because frankly, the one thing the court has always talked about is something called access to justice. And I believe the meaning of that is the courtrooms are open to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, color of your skin, your beliefs. I don't see how this is access to justice for victims. This is simply re-victimizing them when the chief and I then have to sit down and explain to them what happened to their discovery. When the chief discusses these issues of squatting and property damage, he's absolutely right. It's a tremendous problem. It's a growing problem. But you also couple it with what we're currently facing, and it becomes almost an unmanageable problem. With those comments, Mr. Chair and Co-Chair, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for the district attorney, Representative Oakley, and then we'll come back to the co-chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon,
Yeah, no.
Mr. Itzen. So with that, I guess I couldn't tell, are you saying like maybe you wouldn't support like an increase or a change? Because I was trying to think of different avenues, basically, if we were to take this a criminal avenue. Am I hearing, we also, of course, and I know Casper's been busy, so's Fremont. I think we're tied for murders in 2024.
I think you're right.
So with that, I mean, but jokes aside, big stuff that we deal with all the time. And so amongst aggravated assault and other violence, saying basically you don't have the resources to take this from where it's currently held in the civil realm and to try to add it as a, you know, looking for a criminal avenue, if you will.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think my point is, we as, how do we implement this? Simply putting more onto the prosecutor's plate without additional resources is an issue. I can tell you, for example, our drug court program, with the new standards of best practice, you have to spend 3 minutes per drug court client, excuse me, which doesn't seem like a lot, except right now I have a prosecutor in drug court that started at 1 o'clock this afternoon and will go until after 5. So I lose him for, you know, a half a day. And pretty soon we just start chunking down bodies that we have. So my point is, I think we got to look at, when we implement these things, adding to the district attorney's office as well.
Mr. Co-Chairman, or a follow-up? Go ahead, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if it's a follow-up per se, but then, so if we were to discuss taking this in the criminal realm, and maybe it's new to you, I'm just trying to think of avenues myself. Interestingly, with kind of the presentation that Chief McFeeters gave, I was thinking of the wording sounded close to almost a forgery. And if we were to basically add another subsection that went in there, I don't think it fits currently. But when I was thinking of passing or uttering or writing, again, with that as defined, I don't think that fits right now. Perhaps that is something that we could put in this context. You can write, of course, new statutes and you know, we can do what we want and get there in a variety of ways. But do you have any thoughts about wording or statutes or getting there from a legal standpoint in the criminal realm?
Go ahead, Mr. District Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative. I think if you look at language that we used to call the old receive and conceal, knew or should have known, I think that would accomplish what the chief is talking about. If you somehow you rent a home for $100 and it's 3,000 square feet and fully furnished, a person should know or knew or should have known that that's an issue.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my thought is, I hear what you're saying, that we can pass all the laws we want, but if without prosecutorial resources, it might not be all that fruitful. But my thought was, is if we had the statutes where what I hear happens now sometimes is law enforcement gets on scene and they're going, is this civil or is this criminal? And they're not clearly certain that they have authority under the criminal law to make an arrest of these trespassers who are on the property. But if we passed statute that made that clearer, they could make the arrest, they'd have probable cause, they'd make the arrest, those people would be out of the house. Whether prosecution eventuates down the road or not, I think we've served a public purpose. Would you agree with that, or is it pointless to change the law if we don't add the resources?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I understand what you're saying, and yes, practically they would be out of the home. But just as quick, if there's not some pushback there, those folks will go back to the home. If the chief simply locks them up and they don't get prosecuted, they go back. There has to be some level of penalty there. And I think that's where that comes into play. There are times that we do have those discussions. Hey, do you think this is civil? Do you think this is criminal? You know, where does it lie? And I think those our two agencies sit down and try to work that out, the best you can. And I think that along the way, you have those issues, but you got to be able to hold folks accountable for their conduct.
So, Chief and Mr. District Attorney, I've got diplomatic friends up here on this dais, the co-chairman and one of our legal eagles. For me, it almost feels like we'd want to go into the castle doctrine statutes and see if there's something we can do in there. This is a frustrating thing. I wanted to say, one of the senators from here in Natrona County has indicated that he's working on something. I encouraged him to stop by, and he was unable to be here today. But it seems to me as though, committee, there's something in the works. We could certainly encourage that senator to bring that to us in the next meeting in September, so that we can take a look at this issue. I have seen before when committees opt to take up a bill instead of an individual bringing that, but not to step in front of the senator. We can take it up at that time, specific to this. This certainly I don't think is the last we will talk about the issue during this interim. So, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think something to keep in mind as we move forward with this is, if we're going to do something, making sure that we're not cutting the legs out from underneath potentially renters that are lawfully renting, that have a process that they go through if there is conflict with a landlord or having to go through eviction. That's my heartburn with this, because we do have a housing crisis. We do have people that are homeless. And so part of the other concern that I have is this is solving a symptom of a very difficult disease. And so how can we look at potentially solutions for what we need to do for folks that are struggling to find housing? I hear your testimony, but also throwing people in jail who are homeless is not something I'm very excited to do.
Chief, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I appreciate the input on that. I want to assure you that we're coming from this holistically. Certainly at the city of Casper, they are anxiously engaged in the availability of housing. It is not, we believe that there are adequate statutes on the books right now to protect those who have entered into a landlord-lessee arrangement. That is something that is negotiated and dealt with on a daily basis. But this is outside of that relationship that is well researched, and our landlords, our realtors, and our renters are well versed in those processes. This is something different. We would never want to intrude on a situation, becoming involved with something that's purely civil, down to the interpretation of a contract between the two of those. That is not, and Dan doesn't want any part of that. I don't want any part of that. It's not what we do. These are the things that we're trying to address, where there is a kind of a denial of justice for the victims, or on a best case scenario, it's delayed justice. And we all know that delayed justice is ineffective justice. So I am not insinuating there are easy fixes to this. This is a complex problem. I did want to bring it to the committee's attention so that we can begin kind of the conversation of what is in the best interest of our state from every aspect. And I think it's a valid point for those people that, we already have some systems that are working. This is happening outside of it. The state of homelessness, there's no effort on our part to outlaw homelessness. That's not what we're trying to do, but we are trying to mitigate the unjust impact of some of the symptoms, as you described it, that are negatively impacting the community, our state, our neighborhoods, and our individuals.
Representative Oakley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I just wanted to, it sounded like before we were like wrapping up, but is Councilman Gamroth going to speak on this specific issue?
He's absolutely, Representative, going to have that opportunity, and of course, anyone else. I will give a heads up to the committee that we're going to push that last topic to September. So our discussion on law enforcement issues will pretty much wrap up the day. We've got gun-free zones coming up. But anyway, back to you, Representative, with whatever you had.
Well, I'll just wait. We were talking about like where we're going to go, and I actually am going to either ask individually or for a group for a bill draft, but if there's more testimony, it's not appropriate yet.
And by the way, thank you, Representative Oakley, because I wanted to emphasize, just because I brought up that one of the senators was working on something, that doesn't in any way prohibit or discourage us from doing what we want to do as a joint Judiciary Committee. So anything else for the district attorney or Representative Jennings?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the most frustrating things to me on this committee is that we're going to write a new law. And yet it seems to me like there's a number of laws. And I would feel much more comfortable if you could say, listen, this doesn't scratch where this itches, and there's a problem here. And because I think we all agree that you've got a huge problem statewide. But what part of the law that is currently in place, what part would work? I mean, we don't have to do a rewrite for this. We need to massage or find the right answer. Something that helps you deal with this without going to, I mean, we shouldn't have to start over. It seems like there's criminal trespass. It seems like there's damages. It seems like there's fraud involved. It just seems like there's a whole list of things that are involved with this. And so I can't imagine that we got to start out new. And it feels like that the ask is that, hey, this is a new thing that's happened. Well, I think the chairman mentioned the Castle Doctrine or stand your ground or something. You know, we'd like to get out in front of that, and the staffing problems, I get that. But it just doesn't seem like, we ought to have to be writing brand-new law for this. I mean, I would rather hear a statistic. How many people are currently sitting incarcerated with the involvement of taking over someone's home? And I've run into this several times over the years, and when I ask the question, well, is that against the law? They'll say, oh, yeah. Well, how many times have we gone after that? And then they'll say, well, no, we'd like to change the law and make it fit better here. Maybe you can make that case, but I don't know if that part makes sense. It just seems like that starting over.
So, Mr. District Attorney, I think the question is, where's the inadequacy in what we've already got in the green books?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think part of the inadequacy is with some of the elements itself, with the trespassing. As the chief outlines, we can go potentially charge somebody with trespassing. That's 6 months, $750. There may be damage, and you get into that argument of was damage there or not there. I think the language that I was referencing, with Representative Oakley as know or should have known, because the chief's folks will get there and they'll say, well, yeah, we have a lease and you have this. So all of a sudden, I think the interlopers, for lack of a better term, have some political or not political law cover, so to speak, in saying, no, I believe that I'm a lawful possessor of this residence. That leaves everybody kind of in an tenuous situation. I agree with you, sir. We don't need to start over. I think if we add a few words, and it may be just as simple as knew or should have known, could potentially solve that problem.
Thank you for that answer. Appreciate it, Representative. It sounds like maybe we'll take that up. By the way, I want to back up and say, if there are people here to testify on our final topic of the day, we will certainly take that under consideration. By a show of hands, do we have anybody here who was ready to testify on the review of the Wyoming Supreme Court opinion? Anybody here who wanted to testify, or we'd be okay to move that to September? Okay, thank you for that. Back to the issue at hand. Committee, anything else for the district attorney or for the chief of police? Anything else? Gentlemen, really appreciate it. Chief, do you have it, either one of you, do you have anything else for today? We don't want to drop this. We'll come back to it if you have anything else you want to share with us during public opinion here.
Mr. Chair, I just want to seek some clarification according to the scheduling docket. I do have a witness here today to talk about another thing that I want to bring forth to the committee, and I'm just unsure if the public comment period for this section of the docket, if it's allowable under that, or I would be waiting until item number 17 on the docket.
You know, just to abide by the rules of committee, we better make that the next one. So we'll go to public comment on this homelessness and squatting issue that we've been visiting about these past few minutes. So that's what we'll do first, Chief, if that's all right, and we'll come back to any comments you would have at the end of the entire section. We'll go to public comment, okay? So is there any public comment? Anyone want to come forward on the issue of homelessness, the squatting issue, the property rights issue? Councilman, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for all you do at the local level. You guys on city councils and stuff, you do the heavy lifting, so it's good to see you, Kyle.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman Landon, Co-Chair Washit, Representative Oakley. I appreciate the invite. I did not intend on giving any public comment, but because of the invite, thought I'd come share just a few comments. As the chief alluded to, we did make some changes here locally, and I was supportive of those. I do recognize Representative Provenza's comments about treating the symptom and rather than the disease, and we've had that discussion multiple times on council. Myself and several of my colleagues believe very strongly that we need to take a holistic approach to this, and that our resources are better spent treating the root of the issue and not necessarily the symptoms. However, we've been approached by many, many members of the community who have found themselves in these positions. Their own property they are essentially locked out of and tied up in these legal woes for months at great personal expense to them. And so, again, to reiterate, the chief, justice delayed is justice denied. And so we're just looking for justice in regards to those folks. In regards to treating the root cause of the issue, I guess that's where I personally would love to see some action on the part of the state. My concern about the city of Casper, there's many local stakeholders and groups here that want to build out our services. We do have service gaps. There are people falling between the cracks. And so on one hand, we want to do everything we can to make sure that continuum of care is consistent and offers the full breadth of services. The concern amongst a lot of folks, though, is that the more that the city of Casper continues to build out their resources for folks in homelessness situations, the more we're going to attract folks from outside our community that might be better served elsewhere. We've already had those issues in recent years. I believe our city manager spoke to this group last year, I believe, in regards to some issues we were having with folks being transported here and not being, us not being notified, no warm handoff to service providers, just left roaming our streets, and then they end up getting into trouble, and our incarceration budget has gone up very significantly from what we budgeted this past year. And so I guess the action, I guess I would love, I know there's been talks of housing statewide, and it sounds like Senator Anderson might be bringing a bill. I would just encourage and support anything that the state can do to make sure that the services that are required for folks to get out of the situation of homelessness and to treat that root cause. I would love for that approach to be more comprehensive and statewide, because I share the concern that the more we continue to build out in the city of Casper, word gets around, folks, here, city of Casper is a great place. Some of them come here genuinely seeking those services, wanting to get a leg up and get back into independent living. Some folks just want to come take advantage of those loopholes and, take advantage of the system. And so that's all I ask of this group, is to sincerely consider anything and everything that you might be able to do at a state level. It was brought up earlier, the potential, who's the demographic of these folks? I guess that would be one last thing I'd leave you with, is our rescue mission here does do intakes of everyone that comes to seek services. Last I checked, I believe it was 65% of people that seek services at the mission are from Natrona County. 10 to 15% of those folks are residents of the state at large, and then there's 5 to 10% of folks that are outside the state. It sounds like we're seeing more people from bordering states, Colorado and other areas, just because some of those larger cities are at such capacity, but it's mostly a statewide issue. And so that's what I've had some that would have been the wrong word, discourse with some of my local legislators. Some of y'all caught on to that. I've had some discourse, and some of those folks have taken the position that it's a illegal immigrant, kind of undocumented issue. And what I would say is I'm on the local homelessness coalition task force. I believe we're meeting tomorrow. And so we all share statistics. We all share information about this topic. And I've not heard any of those people say that a single time. Some of those folks do come through, but it's mostly a state of Wyoming issue. And so I would just like to leave you with that thought. Otherwise, I appreciate y'all spending your whole day here. My back's killing me just popping in and out for a couple minutes. So thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Alderman Gamroth, it's always good to see you. Thanks again for all the work you do, and thanks for taking the time. Any questions for the councilman? Thanks again. I'm sorry, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to respond to and say thank you for your testimony and for alluding to that this is a state problem. I know in Laramie that we are having concerns as well. We've tried to put into the budget and have succeeded trying to bring in innovative ideas that can come forward, but it hasn't solved the problem, obviously. So I think we need to have more discussions as a legislature, but also with our local partners. So I would invite you to reach out to me at a separate time, and we can talk about how we can try and make that happen.
Councilman, thanks again. As you can tell, it's on all of our minds. I think this homelessness issue, and of course mental health to go along with it, it's top 5 of just about anyone sitting up here. So we'll stay on it, and we always learn from you at the local level. So I want to offer any other opportunity for someone wishing to testify on this homelessness squatting issue. Anybody online? Okay. Thank you again, Councilman. And Chief, back to you. You said you had another item or two that you wanted to share during public comment, and we are at that point, so.
Mr. Chair, I do have some items of public safety that I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee, but I did want to invite a guest up to be with me.
Well, they are welcome. Please come forward, and maybe the chief can lay things out and introduce, but we'll get to you in just a moment. Thank you for being here. Go ahead, Chief.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, first I want to start out by expressing my gratitude for and my acknowledgement of the hard work that this committee put into bringing a bill to the legislature this last legislative session to address a loophole in our law when it comes to the crime of assault. We almost got it to the finish line, and I'm here today to try to reinvigorate an effort to get this thing over the finish line. So just by way of bringing everybody back up to speed, in Old English law, there's a difference between assault and battery. And our state has a kind of a very loose segregation between those two. They're both under the same title. But in our state, the crime of assault is solely me having attempted to hit somebody or batter somebody, to use force against them, but I failed in that attempt. And I think that it is not adequate for the protection of our citizens. Let me get more specific what I'm trying to explain. When it comes to matters of domestic violence, the cycle of violence is something that is well-researched, well-documented, and has become known as kind of a very factual circumstance. The cycle of violence occurs in the beginning of a relationship. There's dates, there's candles, there's chocolates and flowers, but then the true character of an abuser starts to come out. And eventually there is an act of violence. And when that act of violence happens, then immediately after that, there's kind of a honeymoon period where the abuser is seeking forgiveness. He or she expresses sorrow and promises to change. But then the cycle begins again, and that violent tendencies tend to come back. The problem is each time the cycle goes, it gets worse and worse and becomes more dangerous, more potentially leading to homicide. And in fact, some of the homicides that my officers have investigated of recent past are these domestic violence related homicides, where this cycle of violence eventually culminated in the tragedy we're trying to avoid. Currently, as it exists in our law here in Wyoming, me, an abusive husband, could take my spouse and I could back her up against the wall. I could be screaming at her, veins popping out of my head, popping my knuckles, clenching my fists, spittle flying out of my mouth as I'm describing in angry detail the awful things that I'm going to do to her. And she has to withstand that, knowing full well as she's cowering before me in this enraged, maniacal attitude, that this may be the time. This may be the time that cycle is coming. And even if she evacuates her bowels in fear because of this imminent threat on her, and the neighbors call the police get there, and we have to ask the very relevant question of our existing law is, did he hit you? And if the answer is no, we have little recourse. We can offer services, we can notify our victim services, we can try to serve them, but we have little recourse. What I'm advocating for is that we bring common sense back into this statute, that we include language that is very specific, that the crime of assault should include any act, threat, or menacing conduct which causes a person to reasonably believe that they are in danger of receiving an immediate battery. Here's why it's important to me. When those victims call us in this cycle of violence and we do nothing, we have reaffirmed everything that abuser has ever told her, that the cops don't care, they're going to take his or her side, and we leave them having now made the matter worse because we have failed to intervene in this cycle of violence. So when now it comes full circle and it is going to end in violence, we have actually made it worse. We have failed in our duty to serve these victims. And I would submit to you that the placing somebody in the fear of that kind of fear of receiving a battery should be a crime. It would be tantamount to if you just by sheer dumb luck walked into a University of Wyoming sports bar wearing your CSU hat, and a couple of people started to get in your face and starting to threaten violence on you and surrounded you and screaming at you and make you feel like you're not getting out of that establishment alive. That probably ought to be against the law. And that's what this menacing, threatening conduct should be unlawful. It leads to violence. It leads to people who feel the need to arm themselves and do other things. And I'm asking for us to take another shot at adding language into the law that governs it, makes it unlawful for this conduct to occur so that we, the police, can actually serve the people that call us and intervene before it gets to that outburst of angry violence that can be deadly, can have lifetime consequences. With that, Mr. Chair, I would ask for permission to hear from a woman who has lived in this cycle of violence and can offer a statement as to having experienced this firsthand.
We would welcome that. Thank you for being here this afternoon. Maybe you could introduce both of you just for the record, and pull that really close to you if you would. That microphone's not quite as powerful as the one that the chief is using, so.
Okay, can you hear me?
We
All right.
can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, and the committee. My name is Talia Mansell, and I am a victim of mental and emotional abuse, and so I would just like to share a little bit of what that feels like when you go through it.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Fritzler. I am the coordinator at the Victim Services Unit in the Casper Police Department, and I'm her victim advocate.
And can you do that one more time for us, just so
Yes,
everyone knows you?
yes,
I
yeah.
apologize.
I'm Leslie Fritzler. I am the Victim Service Coordinator with the Casper Police Department. I am her victim advocate.
Ms. Fritzler, thank you for being here, and Ms. Munsell, please take it away. Appreciate you being here.
Okay. I'm going to start with some direct quotes from my abuser, and then just lead into what this cycle feels like. Quote, "You're going to get yours in the very most hurtful, painful way. Mark my words. Breathe slow, die quick. Try me all you want. It only takes one time. I swear it'll be the worst choice ever made by you. And it's not a threat, because I'm serious. I'll do prison time. Just know I definitely will act a fool. God be my witness. There will be smoke in the air. I swear I will strip you from everything you have. You will be looking for a new 9 to 5. I promise you that." The list goes on and on. 52 printed out threats to be exact, along with audio messages. What about the suicide threats blaming me for his attempts at ending his own life? I have those too. Not to mention the plethora of evidence of intimidation, aggression, accusations, degrading, name-calling, slander, and me pleading for him to stop and expressing multiple times how fearful I am, just to be mocked and reminded that reaching out to the authorities doesn't faze him. His actions became more intense. He was issued a trespassing order after trying to beat my door down with my entire family inside. The abuse continued through text, calls, emails, driving by my house all hours, day and night. I was now in complete fear, so I filed for a protection order. In that hearing, he still didn't see any wrongdoing, and he also chose to tell the judge he didn't want to see his kids. Only one can imagine how that discussion went with the then 1st and 4th grader. The toll that it took on their emotional and mental health, finding out that their own father didn't want them. So now with one trespassing order and one protection order in place, I should feel a little bit more safe, correct? Sadly, that's incorrect. He still has found ways to disrupt our peace and well-being, including at my children's school, where he was eventually trespassed from there as well. I am still looking over my shoulder day and night, still browsing the parking lot of my location, still looking out of the window wherever I am at the time, and still wondering what he will do if he sees my children in public with other family members or friends. My nervous system, as well as my children's nervous system, are always on high alert. I know what he's capable of, I lived it, and my children lived it. If he wants to get to me or them, he can and he will. He has never been held accountable by those in power for the type of abuser he is, which makes his belief that he is above the law hold true. The 3 orders against him have no impact on his mentality that he has to get caught first. So if he wanted to carry out one of his death threats or show up to the school and try to take my children, he absolutely can. By the time he gets caught, the damage will have already been done. Me as an ex-homicide victim or severely beaten, my children gone without a trace. And as if worrying about my actual safety isn't enough, I also have to worry about my livelihood, as he has made it clear that he will strip me from everything I have, including my career. Will I be left fighting to keep my integrity and career alive because of a man who wants to destroy me? The sad truth is, I feel like every aspect of my life is in the palm of his hands. This type of abuse makes you feel like you live alone on an island. It forces you to be silenced because you know there's minimal help to keep yourself safe, not to mention the retaliation you might face for trying to seek help. You feel trapped and at the mercy of your abuser. But remaining quiet was destroying my mental health just as much as the abuse was. I took the risk to be heard in hopes that the abuse would stop, only to be told that no legal action will be enforced unless he was found to be in violation of the orders. In violation of the orders sends the very clear message that something has to happen to me first, and then law will take action. The law will step in to protect me once it's too late. What a terrible reality to live in. I never thought that my life's narrative would be me telling my parents, sisters, and best friends if anything ever happens to me, missing, beaten, unresponsive, or killed, blank did it. But that is my narrative due to the lack of protection that I actually have. So I leave you with this. I live with fear and trauma. I have flashbacks. My children have flashbacks. And I literally nursed myself back to life, barely weighing 90 pounds during the abuse. Regardless of how far I've come, how much I've healed, and how strong I am today, I will forever feel the effects from what was done to us. And as for my abuser, he continues to live his life as he pleases, not seeing that he ever did anything wrong, because the orders against him are nothing more than telling him to leave me alone. There has never been any legal accountability for his abuse, meaning being arrested and/or jail time. Leave her alone holds zero weight. Therefore, I will continue praying each and every day to have a normal day like a normal person. To all of the victims of verbal, mental, and emotional abuse, both men, women, children, and adolescents, I'm so sorry. I hear your silent cries for help. You are not alone. I stand with you, and we deserve to be protected. Thank you, Mr. Chair, co-chairing committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munsell. Proud of you for coming. Thank you for sharing that information with us. As citizen legislators, that's the only way we know. And sometimes we don't know enough. And so you've helped a great deal today to help us to understand that we still have work to be done. Ironically, that's a message I've been sharing. I've carried about 3 stalking bills over the last 5 or 6 years, and these colleagues have helped me to pass those bills. But I say each time, we're not there yet, are we? So I apologize for that. We don't have everything in place that maybe we should, but really appreciate you sharing the information today. Well done. Questions for Ms. Munsell? Any questions, committee? Okay, Chief, back to you. Thank you for that.
I just want to, Mr. Chair, I want to express my gratitude to the bravery and courage that it takes to come tell her story. All I'm asking for on this particular thing is the opportunity to intervene on this cycle of violence before the tragedy happens. And without question, I am of the opinion we have women and victims of abuse living in fear, feeling abandoned, feeling isolated, and knowing that the police cannot help them until it's too late. And I want to be able, like in many other jurisdictions, I want to be able to intervene now before it becomes a tragedy. And so I would ask strong consideration of this committee to support one more effort to bring that forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, I would ask, they've been patiently waiting all day for them to be excused.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Ms. Munsell, and we will stay on it. And thank you very much. So, Chief, thank you for that one. You said you maybe had another bullet point or two. Please go ahead, get after it.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be as
captured audience.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be as quick as I can. I'm sensitive to the lateness of the hour. The city of Casper is gratefully today, for the first time in 8 consecutive years, our calls for police services finally beginning to be on a downward trend. What is not on a downward trend, however, is crimes of violence. And so for the first time, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I'm appreciative that hard work has gotten to this point where we can experience a decline in the occurrence of crime, but I feel compelled to address some of the things that are leading to this increases in violent crime. And I would ask the committee's consideration for whether or not we can provide some amendments or language in the statutes that would cover some of these loopholes that exist out there. So first of all, I want to talk about the absence of destroying, manufacturing, or tampering with evidence. We don't have any prohibitions against that here in the state of Wyoming. So picture the time when we're trying to pull the armed robbers over from having committed that violent crime, and they drive across the Platte River Bridge and they throw their gun into the Platte River to destroy that evidence and keep it from us. Currently, there's little that can be done about that. Other people are allowed to create evidence that would cast doubt or cast guilt on another person, an innocent person, and there's no crime against that. And so I would ask you to strongly consider what many states have adopted, which is a fact-specific statute that would make it a crime to destroy, manufacture, or tamper with evidence for the purpose of getting one person off or putting guilt on another person. I would recommend that we consider it, this is not something that law enforcement is looking for a carte blanche tool, but in the severity of the crime, the consequences of helping tamper with that evidence probably ought to be taken into account. Mr. Chair, would you like me to answer questions on that specific one, or should I go through the batch?
Maybe keep going and get right through your list there, and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Representative Jennings has repeatedly reminded me that we oftentimes have laws on the books and they may be applicable, but it's getting down to the specifics of the applications. One of the tried and true principles of jurisprudence is if we have a crime-specific statute, the courts have stated you have to go by that statute. If you have one that very specifically talks about the elements on it, then you have to go with that one. You can't pick and choose across other statutes. One of the ones that I would like you to consider is harboring, aiding, or abetting a fugitive. And the crime of harboring, aiding, or abetting a fugitive is different than accessory after the fact. It's the crime of knowing that somebody is a fugitive from justice and yet engaging in actions to prevent their capture, to prevent their knowledge. In deference to our familial relationships, any such statute would eliminate an immediate family member from being a suspect in this crime. We're not saying that mothers cannot try to shield their sons from being captured. But what oftentimes we have is we will be on the look for a violent fugitive, and we will get them isolated, but they will have friends that will put on their clothes and get in the car and drive away, knowing that we're going to go after them while the fugitive gets away. There's been recently a tragic officer-involved shooting here in the city of Casper, where the person knew full well the fugitive was in their apartment. They lied and delayed, tried everything they could to put the officers to downscale their apprehension, and then all of a sudden, there's the fugitive, and it's an armed encounter, and it ended in a tragedy. And we would like to prohibit people's ability to aid and abet a fugitive, again, excluding family members from that. The unauthorized use of a motor vehicle continues to be a plague on us. Members of the committee, I bought my first new from the factory Nissan Pathfinder for $13,000. Our statutes have not kept pace with the realities that we face today. If I were to go buy that same vehicle today, it's going to cost more than my first home did. And we have some loopholes that is contributing to crime in our state. And so let me try to put a finer point on this. The city of Memphis, Tennessee was experiencing extreme amounts of gun-related violence. And they sought help from national experts who came in and did a lot of research, and they came back with recommendations to the City of Memphis Police Department. And the city police department anticipated, oh, you're going to need gang units, you're going to need these problem-oriented policing units. And instead, what the experts said was, what you need to do is take all of your resources right now and put those on auto burglaries and stolen vehicles. And their reasoning was that the gun violence was occurring because of was being facilitated by guns that were stolen out of vehicles, and that that same violence was being facilitated by stolen vehicles being used to go commit those crimes. And so the city of Memphis shifted their resources, and they worked on preventing stolen vehicles and encouraging citizens to lock up their guns. And violent crime diminished by 38% within just a few months. So now let's apply this to Wyoming. In Wyoming, when you steal a vehicle, and Lord knows, some of those vehicles can be $100,000 now. We don't have that falls under the statute of stolen property. And that requires with us a burden for the prosecution and for the police officers to show the intent to permanently deprive the owner of the property thereof. And then we have a misdemeanor statute of the unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. The problem comes, and that's a misdemeanor. The problem comes is when every one of the suspects, when we catch them with that vehicle, all they got to do is tell us, I was going to bring it back. And they have just circumvented the theft statute. And it doesn't take into our unauthorized use of a vehicle, that temporary borrowing of it does not really take into account the reality of it. So if I go buy my $100,000 truck, and I go into the convenience store and left it running, yes, I'm at fault for that, but if they hop in and borrow it, but for the next 2 days, they wrap it out, the motor just, they redline the motor, they destroy the suspension off-roading in and then they bring that, then it gets abandoned and I get it back. I have suffered immense losses. My insurance company, it suffers losses. We as a community suffer losses, and our current statutes are not taking into consideration the gravity of it. A lot of times the legislators will tend to think back at the time when they were 16 and they moved their friend's vehicle as a prank to them. But as your police department, I'm telling you that we do not find teenagers driving stolen vehicles as a prank. What we find is criminals that are driving stolen vehicles in the furtherance of other crimes. And so I would ask consideration to update our stolen vehicle statutes that is more commensurate with the value of today's vehicles, that's more commensurate with the reality that these stolen vehicles are being used to facilitate the trafficking of drugs, the drive-by shootings, and the crimes of violence that are occurring across our state and in my community. And there are simple ways to do this, but to separate this out from the reliance upon the theft statute and its intent to permanently deprive is problematic for vehicles for us. And so the prosecutors, if Dan was still sitting here, would say it is very difficult, and they try to put limits on it. Well, if they leave the county, for example, that might be evidence of intent to permanently deprive. But what I'm aiming for is the ability to diminish the number of stolen vehicles out there, which unfortunately also becomes the second reality that I want to talk about, which is the reality of police pursuits. So oftentimes when we recognize, hey, that's a stolen vehicle, we try to stop it, and they try to flee from us. And I have implemented on behalf of my community and everybody therein, in fact, every citizen of the state and the visitors of our community, I've implemented strict strategies to limit when we would pursue people. Because when we pursue people, bad things happen. In the last 5 years, it's estimated that more than 3,000 innocent bystanders have been killed because of unlawful persons fleeing from police and the results of those crashes that come from that. Those stolen vehicles represent a significant portion of those. And we'd really like to bring some of these things back and focus on what's important. I want to draw attention to a discrepancy in our statutes that I would ask your consideration. Under the fleeing or eluding a police officer statute, it makes it a misdemeanor unless you're convicted of it on an earlier time, or it makes it aggravating under certain circumstances. And one of those circumstances is under 31-5-225, paragraph C, subsection II, subparagraph A, says that if you attempt to cause or intentionally or knowingly cause bodily injury to any other person, that it should be a felony to flee from police. The application of this is that you do have offenders who realize, boy, the police are better drivers than me. I better cause some harm because they're going to be obligated to stop and help innocent victims while I escape. And the conflict that we have is that is punishable by something different. So it is codified in there as a knowing attempt to cause bodily harm with and it conflicts with the aggravated battery statute, which reads the same. And so I would submit to you that a car driving 90 miles an hour constitutes a deadly weapon. But if under the fact-specific nature of the attempting or fleeing or attempting to elude police officers, if they cause that horrible tragedy while they're eluding us, it's only going to get half the penalty as if it was just another everyday normal aggravated battery. And I would ask you to close that loophole. And so I would tell you that getting hit with a baseball bat is clear-cut aggravated battery. But getting hit by a 90-mile-an-hour, 2,000-pound vehicle is far more serious. And so it seems illogical to have this discrepancy that if they cause this kind of injury intentionally with the intent to cause that injury, but they're in a pursuit, it's half the penalty.
Chief, well done.
Chief, if I could,
ahead,
on
Mr.
that
Co-Chairman.
last comment, so is your recommendation that we increase the penalty for felony eluding to match up with aggravated assault?
Mr. Co-Chair, absolutely. This should not be. It does not comport with the damage that comes from pursuits. Mr. Co-Chair, Mr. Chair, if I could, I would love, and I agree that much work would need to be put into this, but right now there's little fear of the consequences of eluding police officers. It will have happened today while we've been in session. It will have happened here in Casper. They will just speed away from us knowing that we have made the policy decision to not endanger our citizens needlessly. And I would recommend that it might be worth our time to start asking ourselves what can prevent these needless endangering of our people. So just this last week, a person sped away from us. We terminated the pursuit. That did not stop their driving. They ended up getting in a crash later on, destroying property and causing injury. We were nowhere near, we were miles away. And yet they were still doing that because the fear of getting caught from eluding police officers to evade this crime just doesn't exist. And I would strongly ask if we could not come to a statutory possibility of declaring the vehicle to be an element of a tool of the crime, and that it should be subject to forfeiture under certain circumstances, as a way of laying out preventative resources to discourage people from even undertaking these things before they become the tragedy.
Chief, we appreciate very insightful recommendations this afternoon. Some of those will more than likely be issues that individual legislators might need to or want to take them up. What you just described strikes me as a potential interim topic that we take a look at, for example. But obviously, it's up to the committee. Some of those items that you brought up today aren't necessarily under our purview, this particular interim, but they do fall underneath this category of law enforcement issues. So thank you this afternoon. You've brought us lots of things to think about, Chief. Anything, committee, for the Chief of Police this evening? Anything more? Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, committee, thank you so much for your patience with me. I know that I can be long-winded, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, we're going to close public comment on law enforcement issues. Excuse me, Ryan.
Yeah,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, yep, Mr. Jason Hansen is online to comment.
Let's bring him on. So
Is this related to what, this has to be related?
yeah. So, Mr. Hanson, we are aware of who you are, but please state your name. And I would just remind you that public comment is specific to these law enforcement issues that we've taken up this afternoon. We are also very late in the day, and we've got people who need to travel home. So,
well, I won't waste your time. I didn't realize there could be public comment on any other law enforcement issues.
yeah, that pretty specific this afternoon to that, Mr. Hanson. If you want to give me a call, we can talk about some things. But this afternoon, we're trying to get things closed out and get people back on the road. So,
Dan, thank you for.
Thank you. Okay, committee, we're to item 15, gun-free zones. Go ahead. My mistake. I want to back up to, yeah.
I want to back up clear to.
The intent of the committee. So, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we didn't finish discussion as far as, I guess, committee thoughts or discussion, clear back to the homeless issue. So I would like to make comment and a motion on that, if that's what you think is appropriate and where we're at, Mr. Chairman.
I do. It would be, what is the pleasure of the committee? Knowing that we may have some work being done, we don't know what that work is, and it can be encouraged to be brought forth, but take it away, Representative. If you've got some ideas, we'd sure love to hear them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is difficult, kind of, but all the more reason that I guess I'd like to work on something, and certainly I can work with Mr. Fuller and LSO. I would say, this is very, very first blush, but when I was listening to the specific problem, it seems to me like the attempt at claiming this false or fraudulent document is what's creating the problem, because then they can say, no, I have a legitimate right to be here, and then that's throwing it in a drawn-out civil process. So if we were to fix it with a criminal, it seems on that. I'd like something possibly in that sort of forgery group of statutes about like a fraudulent writing, but using it in this way where, and I think perhaps Mr. Itzen, if they knew or reasonably should have known, maybe that goes in there, but they're passing this, what they knew or reasonably should know is a fraudulent writing as a way to claim a legal right to be in the house. And then basically we add that to the forgery sort of group possibly. And maybe that's not the right place, but when we're talking about trespass, I don't know. It seems to me, again, it's this passing of a false document in a way, but I know that uttering those things are usually like to get something like to go to a bank. And that would be different here, where it would be to be claiming legal right to be in a home. It seems like maybe there's something there. I don't know if there's anything like this in other states. I don't know. Maybe we look at that as well. But that's my idea for a concept of putting this in the criminal realm.
Do I have a second to the motion? Mr. Co-Chairman has seconded for discussion now. My only question with that, Representative Oakley, would be, do we want to stop there? And what if we've got a group of 30 people living in my home when I get back from being down south for a month, and they don't have a document, but they just say they had permission to be there? So are we covered? I mean, that would be my only question, and but I follow you for sure. Any other discussion? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify, so basically you're saying like notarized, it'd have to be a notarized document. Is that what you're going after?
Representative, go ahead.
Not necessarily. I don't know if they've got it notarized or not, but somehow they're from my understanding, and again, this is new to me, but they're having a document. It might even look like it might be a very poor document, but because of it, they're saying, now you've got to take me to court to evict me, and it's causing, and then because there isn't, I don't think there is a statute that does fit this. I think that is accurate as far as the criminal realm. So if there were enough evidence that this document, that you're taking this and you're passing it, that you've got legal right to my home, and then that's shown that you tried to pass that document, then you've got a criminal charge. And maybe this isn't the right way to go. I mean, I'm really, really knee-jerk in this here, but at least then maybe we could have the discussions on what is and maybe it is a trespass. Maybe we go completely
Just
another.
for the record, Representative, I'm inclined to support anything that we can bring forward and continue the policy discussion of how do we keep this from happening to our constituents who own property
Right.
and can lose it this way. So I'm all for it. I just, we'll have to decide on that front if that's as far as we want to go. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. The reason I seconded this is I think this is perhaps a piece of a multifaceted response to this. And I don't know exactly what Senator Anderson's working on. I know what the bill draft I worked on last year with regards to the Florida statute, where the property owner would sign an affidavit attesting to the fact that these people are not my tenants. They've never been my tenants. They don't own this property. This is my legal property. And that at that point, then you had a criminal trespass. So I think we should bring this bill draft forward. So again, it shows up on our agenda for September. Hopefully Senator Anderson will also be able to join us and we can weave this tapestry of response at that point.
So any other further discussion? Oh, go ahead, Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for LSO, being that we have a senator that's already conducting or in the process of a bill draft. Has any research been given to the senator from LSO as to what these statutes look like in other states? I know they refer to them squatting under trespass law or like illegal lodging, those type of statutes.
Brian, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be able to comment on any of that. If an individual legislator requested research or not, I personally am not privy to that, but, if such research has been, I mean, it would be incumbent, and this is the same for any bill draft as well, that legislator would need to, give us a, thumbs up before we start discussing that.
Good question, Representative. We received permission to bring that up today. The two co-chairmen having run into the senator. And so that's the only reason that we knew that work was being done on that front. What exactly he is up to, he did allude to the fact that another state down south, Florida, I think, has dealt with this and has passed a law that he may try to emulate. So So the motion on the floor is to draft based on the document. Is there any further discussion on that one? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no? Okay, that motion passes. And even though we had an adamant no, we'll look forward to that draft. And I agree with the co-chairman, it might just be part of a tapestry of things that we may need to attack this with. Anything further? Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regards to the testimony that we heard from the good Casper Police Chief, he had several recommendations for cleaning up loopholes in state statutes. And I think, I know I have my notes, perhaps LSO has those notes, but I would be interested in hearing maybe a poll from WASCOP on some of those ideas and whether or not they're statewide recommendations for the committee from law enforcement.
Are you indicating, Representative, you'd like to hear from Mr. Thompson
At the
tonight?
next meeting.
At the next meeting?
Yes.
I think that would be relevant for sure. Mr. Thompson, destroying of evidence and harboring fugitives and stolen cars. We had some good recommendations, I think, and we'd look forward to hearing from you. So good thought. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think this is under specifically your purview, but my concern is that they're not, I mean, law enforcement issues, I guess, is a broad thing, but I wonder, Management Council is going to have any issue with, I mean, they're basically 4 extra topics, and we've got a lot on our agenda, as we saw today. We had 10:35 a.m. We were supposed to start this, and we're, past 4 at this point. So I just want to keep in mind, like, the reason for the interim is to be able to go into depth with stuff, and I worry that if we add even 4 more topics to this discussion, that we're just going to keep not scratching the itch we've got, as I heard from someone else earlier. And quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, there is no public notice for this, for people to be able to comment. So that's my concern, just from a public relations standpoint and a proper notice. I don't know, maybe next interim.
Thank you, Representative. Your 2 co-chairmen are very much aware of that, and we'll treat it accordingly. And I've already mentioned that may be something that individual legislators will have to work with folks like the chief or with Mr. Thompson, but it doesn't hurt for us to have a report back from our sheriffs and chiefs on any of those issues. And that can be done in a pretty expedited fashion, I think. But as far as taking up those issues, Representative, we've got to be a little careful with that. We've got a pretty full plate. I want to come back to one that is at hand, and that is the homelessness, vagrancy, whatever. Is there anything else on that issue, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, let's move on. We do have one final item that we want to get to, the co-chairman and I, and then I want to go, just as a heads up, Mr. Fuller and gang, we will come to you for a little recap of what have we done to ourselves these last 2 days, okay? So that brings us to the gun-free zones, and Mr. Co-Chairman, do you want to lead us out on this?
Yes.
We inherited this topic.
That we did. Management Council desired that we take up this topic over the interim, and do so knowing that well, now we at least know that the executive branch is also looking at this issue. So it would be my thought that we would begin this process, number one, appreciating the significance of the constitutional provisions that this topic relates to, but form a working group of 4 legislators and the 2 co-chairmen to look at the goal of the bill that was presented and passed during the budget session. House Bill 125, the focus was on minimizing the number of soft targets, those locations where guns are prohibited and perhaps innocent people were left more vulnerable in those environments. And so if we start off with that objective and keeping in mind that we have constitutional issues at play, but also that, House Bill 125 passed both the House and the Senate with veto-proof majorities. So I think there's some momentum on this topic as well. But also keeping in mind that the Wyoming Supreme Court said in 1982 that the right to bear arms is subject to the legitimate exercise of police power in the state. And that's what, allows for things like banning of guns in courtrooms and mental hospitals and those sorts of places. So my hope would be that we could form this working group, examine the different approaches that maybe some of our neighboring states are taking with regard to carrying of firearms with a permit, carrying of firearms without a permit, openly carrying firearms, and then network with the executive branch as it looks at rule changes relative to this topic, solicit written input from stakeholders, examine the various gun laws that we've got scattered within Wyoming statutes and consider whether some consolidation of those might be helpful for Wyoming gun owners to have a clear understanding of where they can and where they can't, and under what circumstances. And then have that working group craft for the committee 3 general approaches, not bill drafts, but 3 general approaches that the committee might consider in September in terms of how we might approach statutory changes regarding the carrying of guns in Wyoming.
So, Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. That great job of outlining what you and I have talked about and what we've asked a couple of our colleagues each to join us in, and that is to go to work on this, come back in September with good, legitimate looks at what we might do. Because the reality is we've got to have a product that can clear the executive branch. We might have passed a bill, but it didn't make it all the way through. So first and foremost, we need to look at why. We need to look at that. I like the fact that the co-chairman has pointed out that we have gun laws in 14 or 15 different places in the green books. Do we want to execute that kind of lift to try to consolidate or pull things together? Or I don't know, but that might be one of the options because our gun owners do, I think, face some question marks as to where and when and how. But at any rate, we have asked Representative Nimick, Representative Harrelson, Senator Cooper, who has already begun to work on this. So I appreciate his perspective and expertise, and then Senator Schuler. That would make up a little working group. Anyone and everyone is welcome to listen in at any point in time, but what we will do is gather between now and the next meeting and try to come back with some legitimate recommendations. So, Mr. Co-Chairman.
And I will comment that the working group, by that designation, is doing uncompensated work, right? Those won't be legislative work days, there won't be per diem, there won't be any of that provided for the working group. It'll just be part of our normal legislative responsibility. And the LSO staff will be available to offer some support. So if we want to get samples of what neighboring states have done and so forth, they will be able to assist us. I did ask Brian to try to pull together a list of available dates. And it might surprise you, Mr. Co-Chairman, but the members of this committee are quite busy this summer.
Yeah.
We have a lot of other committees and task forces that everybody serves on, and
we are blessed to have the committee that we do, Joint Judiciary. There's a reason why we're here, and busy people get lots of work. So, I think, committee, that is the best way that we thought that we could address what the Management Council has given us. I have visited with my leadership, and they know that we may have to have another day in the fall. And we're not afraid to ask for another day if we have to take this up and to finalize whatever we might come up with. We think that if we come with some legitimate, well-thought-out recommendations for the September meeting, that should give us enough time to bring it back in November. If it doesn't, we'll address it accordingly. So, anything else? Be glad to answer any questions, but that's kind of the approach that we thought might work the best. Appreciate those of you who stepped forward to help out a little bit between now and September, and we'll be in touch. So, Brian, to you, can you give us a rundown of the last couple of days, please?
Yep, sure thing, Mr. Chairman. So the committee asked for a bill draft concerning what I would just call protection order amendments. Those were the amendments discussed by the court and Ms. Butler. A bill draft that would address the effectiveness of a protection order during the pendency of an appeal. So that was adopted as a motion separately as a separate bill draft. A bill draft to bring back 2023 House Bill 145. This was the Office of Homeland Security and their ability to access law enforcement information. A bill draft based on the Department of Corrections recommendations for amendments to the Restoration of Rights statutes. A bill draft on the statutory amounts for the Governmental Claims Act and then minor settlements. Mr. Chairman, with that one, I would ask for latitude to examine those two concepts. And the question, Mr. Chairman, is whether those should be separate bill drafts rather than one. So I would just ask for latitude to, if we deem it maybe more prudent to bring two bill drafts that we can do so. One for the Governmental Claims Act, one for the minor settlements.
Absolutely. And Brian, also, we talked offline a little bit, and there was sentiment along the committee line here that we look at a stair-stepped approach. And so please have that in your back pocket for us.
Yep. So Mr. Chairman, I think what we would do in that case would be, for the Governmental Claims Act portion, a staff comment that would present language that the committee could examine. There will be some X's in there because, we don't know dates or, specific amounts, but, we can at least give a framework for the committee to look at what that would look like. Then, Mr. Chairman, a bill draft that would authorize the state to have a right of appeal in certain enumerated situations upon adverse decisions in criminal cases. We will draft that. The motion was specific to Utah, but there will be staff comments that show what it would look like if we took Texas, what Texas has, and then another staff comment that would show if we took the approach that Maine has for that. Then, Mr. Chairman, a bill draft for, I guess just a shorthand, the use of fraudulent document to gain possession of property, a new criminal offense. Then, Mr. Chairman, a working group concerning gun-free zones consisting of Chairman Landon, Chairman Washut, Representative Nemec, Representative Haraldson, Senator Cooper, Senator Schuler. With that, Mr. Chairman, just a note is I will prepare some background information that touches on a number of the things that you and the co-chairman briefly discussed today. So I'll have that hopefully in the upcoming days. Mr. Chairman, there were a number of references to items that we would bring back in September. We have those. I won't belabor that. I would note, just in terms of research, there were requests for information on protection orders, what notice looks like in other states, and then also, and this may be folded, I'm not sure if we'll fold this into a staff comment or if it'll be a separate memo, but a question about lifetime protection orders and what that may look like. There was a question on more information concerning adoptions and foster care, the role of the Department of Family Services, and the role of multidisciplinary teams. There was a request for more information on the results of justice reinvestment, and then more information on good time, statutory good time that's available to inmates. There was a request for more information on the statutory amounts, and then I would just note, a request of the sheriffs and chiefs of police to bring back information concerning the list of items that the Casper chief of police discussed. Did I cover everything you had? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's what I have on my list, and happy to take further direction.
As usual, well done, Brian. Thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Maybe it was there and I missed it. We are carrying over the peace officer training for September as well, right?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, Chairman Washut, I believe all of those, or at least for sure the peace officer, the homelessness topics were those specifically noted, and we'll be sure to include those on the draft agenda we prepare for September.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you, committee. That brings us to the end of it. Is there anything for the good of the cause before we close out today? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Just on a personal point, I just want to ask the committee to keep in mind, what we heard today from the district attorney speaks to an issue in terms of our prosecutor system in Wyoming. And that is that we have 2 counties that have elected district attorneys. And when it comes time to securing budget and resources, they're little tiny islands. And they don't have a big constituency at the legislature and within the Appropriations Committee advocating on their behalf. And so I just ask you, as a citizen in Turner County, to keep these kinds of issues in mind, because Laramie County is in the same boat. The issues that affect these 2 counties may not have popular appeal broadly, but they're really important to those population centers that do have elected district attorneys. And so the idea that our district attorney has not had a staffing increase in 24 years that he's been in that office, I don't know if that's exactly correct or not, but it's significant. And whatever resource additions that office has had, they've not been sufficient to keep pace with the workload that's upon them today. And so thank you for bearing with me on that.
Okay, committee, thanks. That's a good couple days' work. I look forward to these issues going forward. I think we've hit on some important things for the constituents back home. Everybody be careful out there, travel safe. Representative, you have something?
Just clarification, we're taking up the Supreme Court opinion at the next meeting.
Yes, we are.
Thank you.
We bumped that forward to September, and thanks for that reminder, Representative. Everybody be careful out there. Thank you. See you a little further up the river, as the old trappers used to say.
Well done, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Oh, man.